Okay, thanks everybody. Yeah, let's make a start. Get a couple of housekeeping things out of the way first of all. So first of all, this session is being recorded. My understanding is that the link will be shared with you post webinar. So you'll be able to go in and review anything that we discuss here today. As a very quick introduction, I will do a further deeper introduction as we go through. My name's Stefan. I work for Sumo Logic. With me today is also Frank Phillis, who's one of our colleagues over at AWS, and also my colleague James Ashburn. James is going to be attending the chat window, so at any time during this session, please feel free to ask any questions. Sorry, and we'll answer those in real time. This session is really going to be split into a couple of different pieces, and as we go through the slides, we'll kind of call out the agenda, timings, and so on. So yeah, thank you for joining, and I'm going to hand over to Frank now to start going through.
Thanks, Stefan. Hi everyone, good morning. You should have video from me in a moment. So welcome again to today's event. Stefan, I'll just get you to forward, please, to the next slide. So here's today's agenda. We'll do some quick introductions, then we'll do an introduction to Cloud SIEM, and also we'll talk a little bit about what good looks like in AWS in a multi-account architecture, which is quite relevant for this discussion. Then we're going to do some hands-on work. So there'll be an Aspen hands-on lab with Cloud SIEM powered by AWS. Then we'll have a break to have a bit something to eat, and then we'll come back for another hands-on lab. Then we'll talk a bit about Aspen certification exam, and we'll wrap up probably around 1:30. Might be a bit earlier, but we'll see how we go. And of course, during the course of the morning, there'll be some breaks as well. So you will get a chance to go make that coffee and do whatever you need to do. Okay, next slide. All right, so today's speakers, I'll ask everyone to introduce themselves in a bit more detail if they would like, and I would hand over to Stefan first.
Thanks, Frank. Yeah, good morning, everybody, once again. So my name is Stefan Tapp. I am the Enterprise Solutions Engineer for Sumo Logic. I predominantly cover the SIEM and SOAR products within Sumo across the APJ region. Previously kind of worked for a couple of other security vendors, again, in that same space. But I've worked in and around security operations probably for somewhere around about 20 years now. So interestingly, the whole kind of cloud thing is probably something that a lot of you are familiar with as well. I started my life with physical servers and monolithic infrastructure and kind of starting to do this journey to cloud as well, which has certainly been an eye-opener for the last few years. So I kind of share some pains and that kind of thing with you. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, James Ashburn.
Good morning, everyone. I'm James Ashburn. I'm a Sydney-based pre-sales engineer with Sumo Logic. Been here for several years now. I mostly focus on the core range of our products, so I don't get into the SOAR or the Cloud SIEM area for the advanced areas there. Happy to be with you today. I'll be answering questions on the Q&A as they come through, the technical questions and what you might be doing in some of the labs. So I'll be there on the Q&A and on the chat. So if you do have anything there, please feel free to go ahead and ask. You won't interrupt the flow. We might answer some questions live in real time, but I'll try to be taking care of you there with giving you links. So thanks for joining us today. Back over to you.
All right. Thanks, Stefan and James. So an introduction from myself. So my name's Frank. I've been with AWS for about 6.5 years. Bit more than half of that time, specifically in security, but certainly in some other roles as well. And much like Stefan mentioned, I've also ridden a few waves, starting off in data centers and monolithic applications and all sorts of fun stuff through virtualization and a couple of other interesting things, and into cloud in the last couple of years. And what a journey it's been. All right, so next slide, please, Stefan. So just to let you know, there is a survey. You may not want to do that right now, but we're just putting the link up there for you now, so you know it's there. And you can, I think we're going to share that in the chat window as well. So when you're ready, please do go and have a look at that, and we'll make sure there's some time at the end there to do that. Stefan, can I just confirm, are we seeing video come through from me? I've got it turned on, but I'm not sure if it's just the interface or you.
Yeah, I can definitely see you.
Oh, good. Okay. All right, cool. That's
Yeah.
my unfamiliarity with Zoom. I think that's more the issue than anything else.
No problem.
Cool. Okay, great. All right, next slide, please. Okay, everyone. So the thing that I will talk about a little bit this morning is how you handle a multi-account structure in AWS. So in this part of the presentation, I'd like to take you through the security reference architecture. We call it the SRA because in AWS, we love our three-letter acronyms. And we'll also talk a little bit about AWS best practices for multi-account deployment in AWS. So this diagram depicts a high-level structure of the SRA. So it's prescriptive guidance provided by AWS, and the idea is to demonstrate to customers what good looks like for multi-account AWS deployments. And you'll see here that in this diagram, we've got two things. We've actually three, let's say three. So we've got an AWS organization, then we've got some OUs, they're organizational units. I'll get to those in a moment. And within those OUs, we've got AWS accounts. So each of these accounts belongs to an AWS organization in the diagram. AWS organizations helps you centrally manage and govern your environment as you grow and scale your AWS resources. Using organizations, you can programmatically create new AWS accounts and allocate resources, group accounts to organize your workflows, apply policies to accounts or groups for governance, and simplify billing by using a single payment method for all of your accounts, which is quite a nice feature. In addition, AWS organizations is integrated with other AWS services. So you can define central configurations, security mechanisms, audit requirements, and resource sharing across accounts in your organization. And it's available to all AWS customers at no additional charge. And I'll talk about some of that centralizing functionality in a moment and how we can use that to our benefit in this kind of structure where we have multi-accounts. The thing to remember about an AWS account is one important thing is that the account itself forms a logical security, billing, and resource boundary. And what I mean by that is, by way of example, if you look at the Amazon resource name of a resource, if you're familiar with ARNs in AWS, you'll see that for each resource, part of the ARN is formed by the account number, which defines that particular resource. So while you can share resources between AWS accounts, you can also restrict which of your team have access to those AWS accounts. And in a moment, we'll dive into one of these in a bit more detail. But first, let's just spend a few moments looking at this organizational unit, also known as an OU, and that's how I'll be referring to it going forward, and the AWS account structure in this diagram. So in organizations, an OU is a way to group AWS accounts together. So you can do things like apply service control policies, for example, to them. A service control policy provides a way for you to restrict what actions can be taken by principals, such as IAM users or roles, within an AWS account. So again, in this diagram, note that we've got an OU for security. There's another for workloads, another for infrastructure. And you can use this OU structure to apply SCPs at the OU level, and the effects of those SCPs then flow through to the AWS accounts associated with those OUs. So an SCP you apply at the security OU, for example, might restrict users from creating certain types of resources, such as those commonly associated with networking. Seems like you're probably not going to need those kind of permissions in a security account, but you can adjust as needed. Conversely, there are other resources that you may want to create in the networking or infrastructure account that you may not want to create in the security account. So for example, things like VPCs, transit gateways, subnets, et cetera, et cetera. So within the OUs, we've got AWS accounts, and that's what's being depicted in this diagram. So let's talk about those in a little bit further detail now. Those accounts are separated by functionality, and I think that's pretty clear from the diagram. So remember that I said earlier that AWS accounts form a nice natural security boundary. And in the SRA, the security reference architecture, which we're displaying here, we use that to our advantage by separating those accounts based on functionality and then giving user access to the accounts that they need to perform their job roles, but not to any other accounts. So to take the example from earlier, you may, for example, give certain members of your security teams access to the security tooling account and perhaps to the log archive account, but not necessarily to the workloads account or the infrastructure account. You may, but you may not. And that, I guess I wanted to highlight the flexibility of this model when you're taking that approach. So additionally, you can use this same approach with shared resources, in fact. So we just talked about users and giving them access, but you also have resources in your accounts, things like buckets, RDS clusters, EC2 instances, Lambda functions, a whole range of things, KMS keys, et cetera, et cetera. So you can use that same approach with shared resources. In accounts where you want to centrally manage resources, you can do that and then share those resources with other AWS accounts that need to consume them. This means that the other accounts can utilize the resource, so for example, a KMS key if you need to do encryption, without having access to modify or delete the resource, because the resource itself is in a separate account that the user doesn't necessarily have access to. They just have access to the resource itself by way of sharing, and they can consume that resource, such as using it to perform cryptographic operations, for example. So it's a powerful model, and it puts you in control of access to both the AWS accounts and the resources consumed within your organization. So with that, today I'm going to focus on the security accounts specifically in the security OU. We won't spend too much time talking about the infrastructure and workloads OU, but what you can do is if you have a look online and do a Google search or whatever for the security reference architecture for AWS, you'll get this document in our prescriptive guidance. And a lot of the diagrams that I'm talking to today, there's usually an analogous one, or if not exactly the same diagram in that reference documentation. And there's a lot more detail as well. So it's definitely worth having a look at. Next slide, please, Stefan. Okay, so now we're zooming in a little bit. So we said we were going to look specifically in the security OU, and that OU has two accounts. And in this multi-account structure we're talking about today, I'm just going to focus on those two accounts. And the first of these is the security tooling account. And then a little bit later, I'll get to the log archive account, and we'll talk about that as well. So just to read from the slide, because I know you're all doing it now while I'm talking, so I'm going to try and catch up with you. So operating security services, monitoring AWS accounts, and automating security alerting and response. These are some of the core tasks you want to do from this security tooling account. The other benefit that you've got, and I'll talk about this in a moment, we have I'll call it a feature called a delegated administrator ability. And in this particular example, the security tooling account is delegated administrator for most of the services that you see listed in that account. So we've got Security Hub, Firewall Manager, GuardDuty, et cetera, et cetera. The other benefit this gives you is consistent guardrails with centralized management and governance across all accounts. And that's facilitated by that delegated administrator model that I talked about earlier. And when you apply this, even though you're managing it from the security tooling account, essentially you're extending those tools across every AWS account in your organization. So it's quite a powerful feature. So to that, one of the great features of AWS organizations is that it integrates with other AWS services to provide management functions across all your accounts. And some services have resources that can be shared across multiple AWS accounts. So for example, we talked about some of those before, and as a further example, AWS Firewall Manager as an example of a service where resources can be shared across multiple accounts. And you use that to create enforceable policies for things like network protections from layer 7 down to layer 3 in the OSI model. So Firewall Manager, set up your requirements, deploy those across all accounts, and all accounts will meet those requirements that you've defined from your delegated administrator account for Firewall Manager. AWS KMS as an example of another service where you would take an approach of sharing resources from a central account. You create symmetric and asymmetric encryption and signing keys, and you can use those keys from a central account to other AWS accounts, and you can also place restrictions on them as you need. So for example, you want to encrypt data in an S3 bucket, you can refer back to a key that's shared from the central account. If you've got an application that needs to use that key separately within your application to do encryption, you can also reference that key in your application and consume either the key itself or a data key that's generated and protected by your KMS master key. So in this model, you also get that functionality, that delegated administrator functionality, and it allows you to configure a member account of the organization as the management account for managing services such as config, Amazon GuardDuty, AWS Security Hub, and others. And that's exactly what this picture is describing. And the nice thing about that is because the organization's administration account is a pretty powerful account. So for example, from that account, you can go and create other AWS accounts, or you can invite accounts into your AWS organization. You want to make sure that only the right people have access to the account. And by being able to delegate administration of certain services, not to the organization's management account, but to a different account, such as one that you designate as a security tooling account, again, you get this nice logical separation in terms of security, where you can just give your security users access to the security tooling account without necessarily giving them access to the organization's management account. Okay. Next slide, please, Stefan. And while you're doing that, I'll take a quick swig of coffee.
No problem.
Just quickly there, Frank, we had a question come in on the chat, and I'm not sure the answer here.
Okay.
Would Firewall Manager replace Security Group, or do we need both?
Good question. So how's the best way to put this? So Firewall Manager enhances Security Groups. So Firewall Manager can manage quite a lot of functionality for you. And for the person who asked, thank you for asking, because it's actually quite a good example. Let's say you've got 10 AWS accounts. Each of those accounts have EC2 instances, RDS clusters, things like that. Those instances have security groups attached to them. But if you don't have a central way to control what users are putting in those security groups, what kind of ingress and egress rules, your life can get pretty difficult, right? Because you could have users having, opening certain ports to the world, for example, which you may not necessarily want. So how Firewall Manager works with security groups is you can, for example, there's a couple of ways to do it, but one way is you could create a model security group, and that model security group defines what you want to see for a particular group of resources across multiple AWS accounts. So for example, you might have a model security group for web access where you're allowing HTTP and HTTPS from any IP address, but not SSH, for example. You then deploy that across all your accounts, and you can enforce those rules on other security groups. So they both work together, and Firewall Manager is used to, I guess, oversee and manage the configuration of your security groups across multiple accounts. So yes, you need security groups, but you can absolutely use both. Okay, and I'll just take no problem at all. I'll just take a quick swig of coffee again before it gets cold. All right, so just stepping back for a moment to reset ourselves. So we just talked about the security tooling account. And if you'll remember when we were looking at the OU diagram at the closer to the start of the presentation, there were two AWS accounts in that security OU. And the second of those is the log archival account. So again, with this account, let's just look at what's up here on the screen. So this is a dedicated account for ingesting and archiving all security-related logs and backups. And one of the key things about the resources that you would have in this account, you can see we got an S3 bucket there. Great example, immutable and durable storage, and it's limited to authorized personnel. And you can send a lot of different logs into this central account. So it could be AWS CloudTrail, Amazon VPC flow logs, access logs from CloudFront and AWS WAF, DNS logs from Route 53, and a whole bunch of other things as well. Now, why are we separating the log archival account from the security tooling account? There's a couple of reasons, and not everyone does it. I've seen configurations where customers will have both log archival and security tooling in one account. Again, you've got the flexibility there to define this as you need. The good thing about separating logs is you don't necessarily want all your security people, or anyone, in fact, to have access to your logs. And there's a couple of reasons for that, but especially for organizations that may have some requirements around logging, whether they're imposed by a compliance standard, government, or their own organizational policies, whatever they happen to be, these things can be super important, not just from a troubleshooting and security perspective, but also from a compliance and a historical perspective of understanding what's happened in the account. So again, we get this nice natural security boundary. We can separate out these things. And important thing to remember with AWS is the account itself, having an AWS account doesn't really cost you anything. What you spend money on is the resources you create in that account. So when you think of it that way and use that to your advantage, I'd certainly look at this, this SRA model that we propose as prescriptive guidance and use that to your advantage. So the log archive account, as we just said, is dedicated to ingesting and archiving all security-related logs and backups. And with central logging in place, the other advantage you get is you can monitor, audit it, and alert on Amazon S3 object access and unauthorized activity by identities. So think of the alternative to this for a moment. You've got 10 or 15 AWS accounts. If you're logging in each account individually and sending those logs to an S3 bucket in each of those accounts individually, you're giving yourself a little bit of a headache, because now not only have you got to manage those logs separately across all the accounts, you've also got to secure your permissions so that only the people that should have access to the bucket do have access, and that you're also monitoring all those buckets to make sure that if unintended or malicious access is enacted by some individual, that you can actually spot that and respond to it. So the other nice thing about this approach is if we centralize these things as much as possible, you're reducing the amount of management overhead that you have to worry about for those kind of things. So security objectives here are pretty straightforward. So, I've said a couple of times, we definitely want the storage to be immutable, and we definitely want it to be accessed only by controlled, automated, and monitored mechanisms, whether that's human or machine. And it's also built for durability. So for example, you can use appropriate replication and archival processes. For those that are familiar with S3, we have various tiers of storage now in S3. So for some of those logs that you store for longer term, you could move those off to a different storage type and also reduce your costs there as well. So the other thing you want to consider here, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, you want to ensure that you've got controls implemented at depth to protect the integrity and availability of the logs and the log management process. And there's a number of ways you can do that in AWS. So we've talked a little bit about user permissions in the sense that we only give users who need to access that bucket permission to do so. We can also apply bucket policies, and you can also do things like apply a policy to buckets that says block all public access, for example, which is going to be critically important in situations like this. So that, and On top of that, if you like, you can also encrypt the objects that are put into the bucket. So from the AWS perspective, you've got quite a few levers that you can pull to make sure that those logs are secured in the way you expect them to be. And then there's some cool stuff in S3, like we've got features such as legal hold and object lock. If you're not familiar with those, it's worth having a look. Just have a look at our documentation, because there's a lot of functionality that we've added to S3 over the last couple of years. It's very much a Swiss Army knife of flat object storage. It's pretty cool. So do have a look at those. So in addition to the preventative controls, the things that I've just talked about, we're talking about assigning least privilege for access. I mentioned encrypting logs with a KMS key is typically the way we do it. We can also use detective controls such as AWS config. So for example, you could have a detective control with config and a couple of other services as well, actually, that says if this bucket is made public in any way, whether that's through an ACL, an object ACL, bucket policy, whatever it happens to be, there's a couple of ways you could do it. We want to know about that. So, and you can have config to do that for you. So I can go through, check your buckets. If it detects a change, config will run a rule against that bucket to check the configuration status. And if the configuration status indicates that the bucket's been made public, that, for example, could send an alert to your security team. But in fact, in AWS, you could also just automate the solution to that problem and just go and call an API and have that access removed. Absolutely doable in AWS using services like EventBridge, which is one of the services listed along the bottom row there. Okay, so I'll just stop for a moment, just in case there's any other questions have come in, James. And I can drink my coffee while I'm waiting.
Yeah, good reason for a break. No, currently no questions.
All right, cool. Okay, so thank you. So here we go. Is it correct to say that AWS config findings are fed to Security Hub? That is a really good question. So you can do that today, not out of the box. You'd require a couple of manual steps to make, well, not manual, you would automate it, but it's not an out of the box where you can just go and tick a checkbox, for example, and make it happen. I'd keep an eye on our feature updates because we're always adding new features and things, and that's actually a good call out. So the config rules themselves don't go to Security Hub by default, but you can still manage that if you want them to go to Security Hub. But I'd say for most use cases, the main benefit you're going to get out of config is the situation I described earlier, where you're checking the configuration of a resource. And if that resource falls out of the configuration parameters that you have defined for it, your rule will alert you to that or take automated action to fix that problem. The other thing to remember with config is you can also send the configuration history for all those resources, which is another feature of config. So it records that information for all supported resources types. You can also send that to your central logging bucket in S3. So exactly the model that I'm talking about here. You could send it into the central log bucket, but you wouldn't send it directly to Security Hub today. Thanks for the question. Any other questions? All right, cool. So that's mainly the part that I wanted to talk about this morning, though I'll certainly be back at various points during the presentation. So in summary, customers with multiple AWS accounts do need to consider a cohesive account strategy that is flexible enough to meet operational requirements to the business, but can also be secured to better protect against both internal and external threats. And that's more or less what I've tried to outline with this prescriptive guidance that we give in relation to the security reference architecture. And that architecture provides you some pretty good prescriptive guidance on how you would go about achieving that in AWS. So for the moment, I'll now hand over to Stefan to get us started on the Sumo Logic Cloud SIEM powered by AWS. Thanks, Stefan.
All right, thank you, Frank. That was very informative. Thank you. Okay, great. Let me just move on a slide a second. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, so generally within Sumo and certainly within security operations and security monitoring world, I generally find, yeah, as per this slide, and excuse me for looking away from the camera, I've got kind of multiple monitors, so it's hard to kind of keep focus on the camera, which would be useful if I also had it enabled. Sorry, one of those days today. So yeah, we have three particular challenges that we're facing at the moment. You know, one is a little bit about what we're talking today around, you know, this move to cloud. Being able to support multiple cloud as well, you know, not just AWS, but you know, if you've also got infrastructure running in GCP or in Azure, etc., the ability to be able to centralize monitoring into one place is becoming increasingly difficult with traditional kind of on-premise legacy SIEM platforms. The next one there really is that shift in the threat landscape as well. So, you know, as we moved into this digital transformation, we haven't necessarily left behind the old attack vectors. We still suffer with those, right? We still have things like phishing attacks. We still have perimeter devices that are constantly being probed for, you know, misconfigured ports or vulnerabilities, etc. But additionally, now on top of that, we have to take into consideration, you know, what we're exposing publicly via the cloud. S3 bucket exposure, you know, Google Share, Google Drive, for example, being opened publicly. You know, some of those are the other challenges that we have. We're still suffering from alert fatigue, and even more so now. As I'm logging more and more log sources into, you know, into those SIEM platforms, I've now got all of the addition of, you know, the cloud-centric events coming in on top of all of my, you know, legacy previous logs that I had before. So that's really a very big challenge. You know, we're all acutely aware of the shortage of security professionals in the industry, and that's a global problem. I've been working with a couple of customers in Japan, you know, and they've been trying to recruit security analysts for nearly 2 years. It is such a difficult thing to do. But of course, on the flip side to that, just literally throwing people at that problem is you know, you're never going to address it. Again, you know, I can recall working with customers generating 8 or 9 million alerts a day. Even if I went down into Sydney CBD and I scraped everybody up and sat them in a big theatre and presented them with those alerts, we still wouldn't be able to scale. You know, it's very, very hard to just rely on human interaction to solve that problem. So essentially what we've done here at Sumo Logic, using our Cloud SIEM powered by AWS, is to allow us to do things like reducing the complexity and blind spots. For us, it's incredibly easy to bring in log sources from multiple clouds. You know, we support all of the major cloud platform providers. All of the log sources that come with that transformation to cloud. You know, we can bring all of those into the Sumo platform. You know, our system as well is hosted on AWS. It's something that we've done from the offset. It's a partnership that we're very proud of at Sumo Logic. It gives us, you know, immense scalability and stability, etc. So, you know, it's really good for us. It allows us to scale. The security context we can bring in from AWS is really good as well. It also allows us to, you know, support multi-cloud and all data staying within AWS. So that's another benefit for, well, certainly for customers we have who are AWS customers themselves. And then the final point there is that it's very easy to buy our Sumo Logic Cloud SIEM powered by AWS through the AWS marketplace. It's pretty straightforward. I've never seen anything so easy when it comes to actually, you know, finding a security monitoring solution or an application solution. It's really good. So we have two solutions essentially. We're kind of on a security focus today, but obviously we have our core platform, our continuous intelligence platform, allows me to do infrastructure logging for pretty much everything, for my DevOps, IT infrastructure, and so on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. But the two solutions that we currently have, so we have Cloud SIEM. And Cloud SIEM allows me to very, very quickly bring log sources into the platform. And then using things like our out-of-the-box dashboard capabilities, built-in threat intelligence, and deep search investigation, I can pretty much have real-time, very quick value. I can literally bring in all of my AWS sources, and I can have my dashboards populating with some pretty important information within minutes. It really is that fast. We also, as you can see there, compliance readiness as well. So our entire platform is, carries multiple attestations, both for what we do, but additionally as well, if within your industries you have things like PCI, HIPAA, other compliances, then we already have a whole heap of content that's ready there for you to be able to leverage those those controls and get visibility on what's happening. The other point there is, we preserve security investment. So the good thing there, if I'm still on that cloud transition, what you don't want to do is you don't want to go out and get a cloud-centric SIEM platform that doesn't have the ability to integrate with my existing infrastructure. So again, with our platform, if I have legacy on-prem, anything from on-premise Active Directory to on-premise firewalls, I can still bring those log sources in. I can get them in very quickly. And again, we have a whole stack of dashboarding, reporting capabilities in our app catalog, and we'll dive into that a little bit deeper later on to give me that kind of quick time to value. And then ultimately, total cost of ownership. I don't have to spend time anymore where I've got to find rack space. I've got to think about how much power consumption I've got. What's the cooling effect or the heating effect of these appliances? So I now have that kind of traditional on-premise data center costs taken away because we're cloud hosted. You literally pay for what you ingest. We do all of the maintenance, the updating, and everything else for you. So I don't have to have dedicated people looking after hardware and infrastructure anymore, which is really good. So a question that's popped up there, agent or agentless when considering the endpoints. That's a good question. It depends very much on the vendor. So if I was to take, let's kind of keep on that security context. If I'm talking about something like an EDR solution and it's CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, any of the vendors there, then we can use agentless because we're literally connecting using cloud connectors to their infrastructure. To CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, and we can actually pull the logs over that way. If I'm talking about more traditional on-premise, I need to gather logs from an Active Directory server. Then we have, a lightweight collector that needs to be deployed within the environment. There's a couple of different ways to do that. If I have a very small environment, I can deploy a collector direct to collect Active Directory logs, for example. If I want to gather logs from multiple things, I want to be able to collect syslog. I want to gather multiple Windows events logs and so on. Then I can also deploy an on-premise collector, and that would give me the ability to actually send multiple streams into that one collector. So I don't need to have one for syslog, one for Active Directory. I can actually leverage one collector, bring all of those sources in, and then have those securely forwarded across into the Sumo platform. hopefully that's answered that question for you. Let me just take a quick sip of my coffee. I'm like Frank, I made mine earlier and it's going a bit cold, so apologies. Okay, so the second part of what we offer then, our Cloud SIEM Advanced. Now this is designed more towards an organization that already has a security operations center. And I've got a handful of security analysts, and I'm struggling with some of those typical things. The inability to correlate across multiple log sources. And again, this is where that digital transformation is really important, because I need to also consider, what my users are doing in the cloud, in addition to what my on-premise infrastructure is doing. So having a tool that easily is able to, to correlate across all of those sources is vitally important. As part of that correlation as well, I also need to enrich the information. Quite often in security, we always talk about context is key. It's one thing to have a security alert generate, but without knowing the bigger picture around it, the context of why that's generated, makes it incredibly hard to investigate. So as part of this, of the advanced platform, we also enrich that information. So we automatically pull in threat intelligence feed information. I might enrich it with additional information from Active Directory. If I'm running an EDR solution, then my EDR solution, Sentinel-1 as an example, is able to enrich that alert for me and bring a lot more context in. And that applies across pretty much everything, users, devices, network data, etc. Okay. The third and probably most important thing there, and this is certainly one thing that resonates with me, is around automating workflow and improving the whole security operations kind of processes. I think part of the challenge for far too long, when we talk about security operations and we talk about traditional SIEM platforms, we've always thought about how we need to automate responses. Okay, so my SIEM platform's telling me something's going wrong, and I think for quite a while now, the industry's been kind of focused on, okay, now I know something's happening, how do I automate responding to it? But I think where we've been missing the key piece is actually automating the investigation phase. And again, kind of going back to what I touched on not long ago, I've worked with customers generating millions of security incidents or security alerts a day. And I think if they've been given the luxury of a platform that was able to automate those and bring those down into a handful of things that really matter, then that's probably one of the most important things to me as a SOC analyst. It's gonna reduce alert fatigue. It's gonna reduce analyst burnout. Thankfully, I've never kind of been in that position, but I certainly know lots of ex-colleagues and friends who are in security operations. And they kind of get to that point where, I've had enough. The infrastructure's too noisy. I'm being measured on how many things I'm resolving in a day. And it's just an impossible task. It's really, really hard to address that problem. So with our advanced Cloud SIEM platform, it actually does automation of that investigation phase. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the morning. Okay. So question there from Charles. Can we leverage Sumo Logic on AWS public cloud to integrate with SaaS applications? Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of different ways of interacting with other applications, whether we have dedicated collection methods. We have pretty comprehensive API integration within Sumo as well, so we can leverage those APIs to connect to other infrastructure. So yeah, it's pretty comprehensive. And I think I've got a slide coming up which talks a little bit more around some of that information as well. Okay, so let's start to dive a little bit deeper on the Sumo product. So here's a kind of quick agenda of what we're going to look at for the rest of the morning. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction and a brief demo on what we can view from an AWS perspective using our Cloud SIEM platform. Okay. Then what we'll do is we'll look at some security analytics with Cloud SIEM. And at these points here, this is where I'm going to give you guys a login as well. Okay, I want you to be able to log into the platform, have a look. We'll go through, look at some dashboards. I'll show you how easy it is to install an application from the app catalog, etc., and how quickly I can get that information in and show that visibility. We're going to take a look at the CrowdStrike threat intel. So our Sumo platform comes complete with it's just industry leading, right? It's CrowdStrike. We all know CrowdStrike. So we have the ability within our platform to leverage CrowdStrike threat intelligence, not just for AWS, but actually for everything I bring in. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. There's a couple of little queries that I want to just kind of get you guys to have a play with regards to testing threat intel, looking at user logins. Then we'll take a break. Just so you can go and grab a coffee, quick bite to eat, whatever you need to do. Then when we come back, we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and we'll take a look at the Cloud SIEM Advanced platform. Okay, and again, I'll give you guys a login. I'll take you through a guided investigation first of all, just to show you how easy it is to investigate using that advanced platform. Then I'm going to let you guys do an investigation yourself. I'm going to give you an insight to go and investigate. And then we'll talk a bit afterwards about what you've seen, what conclusion did you come to, and what actions would you take next. Okay, so you're going to get some hands-on time there as well. Then I'll talk a little bit about how easy it is to tune in that platform as well. For those of you, who are familiar with SIEM platforms, logging of security events is one thing, right? Another challenge really is tuning that noise down, being able to build content within a SIEM platform. So kind of taking on that SIEM engineer aspect. And that in itself can easily be a full-time job for at least one or two people, depending on the size of your infrastructure. So we'll talk again a little bit about how simple that is within our platform. Then we'll do a quick summary. Now, I've got exam written on there. Actually, I'm not going to force you to do an exam today. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to take you through some of our training and certification that we have in the platform, show you where you can find it, what's in there, what you can do, that kind of thing. It certainly helped me when I joined Sumo Logic. I've only been here for just over a year, and I'll be honest, I kind of come from a SIEM background where everything for me was point and click. So I wasn't familiar with running search queries and that kind of thing. And one thing that impressed me actually was how quickly I was able to pick that up using the training, and the certifications we have in the platform. Okay, so it's kind of enough waffle from me around the agenda. Let's pop on to the next slide there. Okay. All right, let me just quickly give you an overview here of what this slide is showing you, and then we'll go through each particular aspect there. So when we're talking about continuous intelligence, there's kind of several areas there really that Sumo Logic's Cloud SIEM is able to give you. We have the different kind of operational security, business, global intelligence on the top there. Then we'll talk a little bit around what kind of data we would bring into the platform. We'll talk a little bit more around the different analytics and where the platform benefits can help you there. And then, a little bit more around, the typical kind of users within an organization that can use our platform. Okay. So essentially, digital transformation requires continuous intelligence. And businesses are leveraging this new category of software. So continuous intelligence, what it really means is real-time analytics and insights from a single cloud-native platform, which gives me that visibility across multiple use cases. It allows me to make very fast decisions. And certainly for our customers who use it not just for security, it allows them to ensure that whatever they're providing to their end customer, they're on top of that infrastructure. They get very quick, alerts and notifications of problems in infrastructure. Maybe a retail customer where some part of the checkout process is broken. Okay, so you get a lot of abandoned carts and customers that can't do that thing. And then, of course, the security aspect as well. So having analytics across your operation, security, business, global intelligence, gives you that continual awareness, which will impact your results, whether that's how quickly I'm responding to security alerts, how quickly I'm addressing infrastructure problems like we just discussed. So to dive a little bit deeper in there, operational intelligence, are my systems up and running? What's my mean time to identify, my mean time to respond for that infrastructure? Do I have any other health concerns with my environment? From a security intelligence perspective, who's using root access within my platform? Have I got users logging in from multiple locations simultaneously? And has the SIEM elsewhere picked up something and given me this actionable item to go and respond to? When it comes to business intelligence, what pages are my customers frequently looking at? What are they ordering? If I ran a marketing campaign, was it successful? Have I seen an increase in workload activity on my platform? So using that data-driven intelligence to extract the real-time insights and business value from massive volumes of machine data generated in the form of logs, metrics, events, metadata, traces, and other telemetry. These are coming from your apps, microservices, cloud systems, infrastructure, SaaS, mobile devices, third-party systems and feeds. So we have built-in apps that will provide you immediate functionality. And we talked about that a second ago, how I can bring in a log source, install the app from a catalog, and then have visibility over what's happening, very, very quickly. Our app catalog as well probably covers somewhere around about 85% of your immediate query and analytic needs within the platform as well. Okay. When we talk about analytics, so we have multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy is pretty important from both a security aspect. It means that I'm not sharing my data with another customer because I'm using the same part of infrastructure, etc. Multi-tenancy also means that I have lots of scalability there as well. And we'll talk a little bit more around scalability in a few seconds. So we also have advanced analytics, machine learning built into the application. It's very easy to plot your data in a Mapbox plot, so I can get this global view of where my connections are coming from, etc. And then using machine learning in the platform to identify new security threats. Now, one of the real big advantages as well is because we're in the cloud, we are of an elastic nature. We can scale automatically. And this week actually is a really good example. Okay, so for our retail customers, where we have, Cyber Week, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, etc. So for a lot of those customers, naturally their infrastructure needs to expand automatically to cater for that additional volume of traffic of users like you and I spending our dollars on their websites. On the flip side to that, of course, as they're spinning up more infrastructure, they're creating more events, more logs, and then those are coming into the Sumo Logic platform. So for our customers in that space, they also need to be comfortable with the fact that their security monitoring, their infrastructure monitoring is also able to keep up with how fast transactions are occurring, making sure that the availability is there. So that's also very important for them. We scale up automatically. When we come to Tuesday or Wednesday next week and the customer's workload reduces, then also our infrastructure will scale itself back down and keep in line with normal logging volume. From a security side as well, that's pretty important. I've unfortunately been in a situation in the past where an organization I was working for suffered a denial of service attack. And we suddenly had a huge increase of events coming off of our perimeter firewalls. So much so that the platform we were using just couldn't handle the load. And response time was incredibly slow. We had collectors that stalled because they couldn't handle the volume, and when you're in the middle of a cyber attack of that kind of nature, the very last thing you want is to have a SIEM platform that just stops working. Okay, it must not impact my investigation, because that's critical for me to still have that speed to be able to investigate. Where's my attack coming from? What's it targeting? Have they got in, etc. Okay. So we also support API interfaces as well. So you can incorporate Sumo with lots of other platforms. And again, that's pretty comprehensive. It's all very secure. The platform itself has various security attestations, and that works across both our Cloud SIEM and our Cloud SIEM Advanced as well. Okay, so our attestations: PCI, SOC 2 Type 2, ISO 27001, HIPAA, CSA, S-Star, and also more pertinent, obviously, for our US customers, or one aspect of our US customers, as well as we're also FedRAMP moderate. So I can see a couple of questions that have popped up there as well. Yeah, good question, Charles. Thank you for that one. Yeah, IRAP. We are currently investigating IRAP for assessment. That's in progress at the moment. I don't have a timeline of when we will be IRAP certified, but it's certainly on the roadmap for us. We do have a web page, and I'm sure James can pop the link into the chat window for me as well, where you can actually go in and look at the current attestations that we have and download the reports accordingly. Okay. But yeah, absolutely, IRAP is at the top of our list at the moment for Sydney. So we're hoping to to make some good progress on that for sure. Okay. Lastly, then here we're talking about your people. So again, today's more of a security focus, but our continuous intelligence platform is literally aimed as a central logging platform for all of your data. Whether that's DevOps, engineering, IT operations, security, customer success, product. It's like an endless list of people that would use our platform. The really good thing there is that I can ingest that platform, and then I can give access to anybody. Pretty comprehensive RBAC controls as well. So if I only want to give certain access to my security teams to certain data, then we can do that, etc. Okay, so it's pretty good. Yeah. So moving on to the next slide here. When it comes to the security side of our platform, we have three key areas, and these are really dependent on your own personal needs, on your own organization needs. So on the left, first of all, here is our audit and compliance. Okay, it's highly scalable, it's secure. As we've talked about, you can collect the data using on-prem, cloud, whatever you need. The key thing there is I might only need to use that platform for compliance logging. Okay, I don't need to do security analytics, security monitoring across that. I just need to prove to somebody, like, for PCI compliance, that kind of thing. Okay. Second one here then is our Cloud SIEM platform. So Cloud SIEM is for a security team that may not necessarily have that dedicated SOC team. allows me to do some pretty comprehensive and in-depth searches. You know, I can still correlate across that data and analyze it. I've talked about the app catalog and the dashboards, and we have a whole heap of really very good security-centric dashboards there as well, and we'll take a look at some of those. But we also have some other really good features built into the platform as part of the core product. You know, we talked about CrowdStrike Threat Intel. So that ability for me to literally look at every log source for threat indicators is really important. You know, I might uncover something in a DevOps environment which is connecting to the internet and it's talking to something malicious. Now, under normal circumstances, you know, and again, talking from my experience in the industry, we might not necessarily focus our security monitoring on DevOps environments, but it's you know, it's critically important, right? Because that normal progression is we do things in DevOps and then we might move it into our live operational space or something, or from a test environment to live environment. And you don't want to be carrying across malicious code and that kind of thing. So having that threat intel that looks across everything is really, really important. Looking for anomaly detection as well is something that we can do within Cloud SIEM. So we have things like outlier detection. And again, I'll kind of show this to you when I jump into this demo screen shortly. With outlier, it kind of gives me that baseline of activity. So if I'm seeing more logins than normal, then it will give me an indicator and I can alert on that. Two other really good things as well, log reduce and log compare. So they use machine learning to look at similar logs. So if I have, let's say I've just run a query that's brought back some firewall logs and I've got 20,000 events. By using log reduce and log compare, the machine learning will look at those 20,000 logs and actually find things that are different in those logs and then reduce the overall number. But give me a presentation of, hey, this is where this log has started to differ, okay? Multiple use cases for that, not just security, which is really, really good. On top of that as well, so one of the other key things we have is we have community threat benchmarking. And again, we'll take a deeper look on this because I think this is pretty important. So with things like AWS GuardDuty and CloudTrail, we're able to look at what other customers are doing and then give you that ability to benchmark your environment against other people, okay? So in the industry, you know, if we're seeing a particular attack vector, what does that look like in my environment compared to my peers, okay? So again, you know, that's really useful kind of information. Lastly here then is our Cloud SIEM Advanced. So as I've kind of talked about this one loosely, you know, this gives me continuous threat correlation across all of my log sources, whether those are cloud, on-premise, etc. It's real time looking at everything that's coming through. Some of the other benefits as well is the ability to look back over a set time period. So out of the box, for example, I can look back, or it keeps track of what's happening for the last 14 days. The relevance of that is if I have a low and slow attack in my environment, then it's likely to pick that up as well. So as a good example, if I wanted to get a set of user credentials, okay, the first thing I might do is to try and send a phishing email to a user, get them to go to a fake Office 365 website, log in with their credentials. I've now got your credentials. I might give it a day or two, and I might log in then to that user's email account. And I'm going to sit there for a few days, right? I'm going to work out who you are, what do you do, who do you collaborate with, you know, what do you potentially have access to, you know, looking for internal emails with hyperlinks to shares and that kind of thing. Then I might leave it for a few more days. And then I might actually start to explore those shares and see what I can get access to. So if I'm doing that over a period of time, I'm minimizing the amount of security noise I'm generating. But with our advanced Cloud SIEM, it gives me the ability to actually tie those events together over a previous time period. Okay, like I said, gives me that low and slow capability. The other key thing here as well is that workflow. So we have the workflow within the platform itself. As an analyst, I can get an insight generate. I can investigate it. I can either close it internally. I can push it to an external ticketing system, ServiceNow. I can even leverage things like Slack channels, etc. And push that incident to a Slack channel for investigation. But I can contain everything within Cloud SIEM if I need to. Okay. And then the last very important one there, and again, this is what I kind of emphasized earlier on, is that automation around the investigation phase. So instead of generating, 100,000 alerts a day, we have something what we call an insight clustering engine. Essentially what that does is that tracks users, IP addresses, host names, anything that we class as an entity. And then every time a security signal is generated for that entity, we keep a track of that. And we also look at the severity score. When that severity score reaches a certain level, then the system clusters those signals together into one insight and then bubbles that up, says, hey, you want to go and look at this. Okay. And it will also give an additional severity according to what it's seeing inside. So now as a SOC analyst, when I come in to start my day, I'm not sure you probably can just about make it out on that slide there. I've got 2 insights to investigate instead of 1,000 security signals. So it's almost like having an automated level 1 SOC analyst, which is really good. And like I said, I think it's one key area that as an industry, we've kind of neglected for many years. We automate responses, but we forget about automating the investigation phase. So that's a really strong point here with Cloud SIEM. Okay, kind of switching focus back a little bit. We talked a little bit then around about our app catalog. So we have somewhere around about 200 apps, and I think probably more than half of those are security focused. It is as simple as when we're in the platform, and again, you guys you'll have a go at doing this. I can click on an app. I just need to tell it where my source category is, where I'm sending my events. And then within seconds, it installs the app and I can view that information on the screen. Okay. And we have everything in that app catalog there. Even just on that screenshot, you can see, there are vendor specific apps that might be looking at things like Okta logins, for example. You can also see in that kind of, in that right-hand corner there, PCI compliance dashboards for both, AWS, Windows, etc. And then on that bottom row, the CrowdStrike threat intelligence that we talked about. Okay, so it's pretty comprehensive. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to jump in and I'm going to give you guys a demo, but just before I do that, I want to kind of pivot back to Frank for a few seconds and just talk to Frank. And by all means, take this bit to kind of follow up with any questions you have, the AWS and security monitoring side. Probably one of the most I get asked from my customers when we're working with them and we're using, they're an AWS customer, what should I be logging? Should I be logging CloudTrail and GuardDuty and Security Hub? Do I need to focus on one of them, multiple of them, and so on? So Frank, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love for you just to kind of give us a little bit of kind of best practice information around some of those log sources.
Sure, absolutely, Stefan. So, I guess as Stefan alluded to, there's a lot of tools in AWS that allow you to implement detective controls. And I'll come back to some of the things that Stefan mentioned earlier, because I think they apply here and they're quite interesting. But just to go straight to the core of the question, a couple of critical things that we do recommend you log is certainly CloudTrail, because you want to understand what's happening at the API level in your AWS accounts, critically important. And remember, the first trail that you implement in AWS is provided at no additional charge. So, we take this approach in AWS that we want you to be using these services, getting yourself secured. And so things like that, IAM, organizations, and a couple of other services, you get to use those at no additional charge. CloudTrail is critically important. And to go to some of the things Stefan mentioned earlier, is you need insight into what's happening at the control plane and increasingly at the data plane as well. CloudTrail is starting to give you more information about that. And when you build up that intelligence over time, you get better insight into what normal looks like and what's not, or what's abnormal in your AWS account. So CloudTrail, critically important. GuardDuty is another great service. And this one differs a little bit, and we do recommend customers use this. There's a couple of reasons for that. GuardDuty is focused around looking at anomalies in your AWS accounts, primarily related to 3 services. So the first is IAM, so your users and how they're using the service. That's going to be an obvious one, and Stefan gave an example of this credentials type issue earlier. Next is EC2. So for example, do you have EC2 instances that maybe, for example, trying to resolve URLs through DNS for known command and control servers, or Bitcoin mining hosts and things like that. And the third one now we just recently added is looking at S3 as well. So the interesting difference between GuardDuty and CloudTrail, for example, is going to some of these things that Stefan was talking about earlier, is rather than looking at a single individual alert in your account, you want to have some insight. And usually the ability to have that insight means you need to be able to correlate multiple data sources from your logging together to get a better understanding of what's happening. And he talked about context, and that's critically important. We've got some other services that can help you with understanding the context, but just having enough information to understand what a particular finding might mean usually means that you need some kind of insight, is a phrase that gets commonly used to get a better understanding of whether this thing is actually really likely to be a threat or not. And GuardDuty does that, for example, by looking at VPC flow logs, your use of access keys through CloudTrail logs, and a couple of other sources as well. So for example, DNS logs. So all those things together give us a better picture, and depending on the type of threat we're talking about, a better indication of whether this is something that's really anomalous and that's worth looking at from your perspective. So definitely those 2 are important ones to enable. There are others as well, but it's going to depend on your use case as to whether you use those or not.
That's great, thank you. That's yeah, really useful. It's a conversation that comes up quite a lot. To be honest, though, I think most of the customers I work with, they tend to bring in CloudTrail, VPC, GuardDuty, etc. We have some pretty comprehensive both applications for all of those, and also within our Cloud SIEM Advanced as well. It has some really good correlation and content rules around activity there.
Yes.
And you mentioned actually the one around things like crypto mining, which is actually a good one, because we have a pretty good example within our in our demonstration environment, where we're getting this crypto mining alert coming in from AWS, but at the same time, because we also monitor things like metrics, it's coupled in with things like an increase or a spike in CPU, saying that CPU and memory is hitting the roof for a set period of time. And of course, because the host or the entity, as we call it, is relevant across all of those signals.
Yeah,
it's really cool because it gives me that really comprehensive view now of taking both an AWS alert into the platform, but also taking things like metrics. And I have never seen that kind of capability previously with other tools that I've worked with.
Yeah.
We have other tools that monitor for things like CPU and memory, but to be able to tie that in with an AWS alert as well is a really strong kind of use case for that visibility.
Yeah, definitely. And that, the ability to pivot between those things quickly within a single console is a big value add, because you want to, like, as you've just highlighted, it's fine to see that potentially this thing has happened and we're a bit concerned about it, but what does it really mean for your environment? So, if you can pivot in, understand how your instance is behaving in that particular case, is it having an effect on CPU, memory, or anything else? Really important. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. All right. Thank you for that, Frank. Let's kind of jump back into where we were. Let's have a look. Okay, so I'm going to, let me just, I've lost my header that allows me to change my share. Bear with me 2 seconds. I'm going to switch across now into our live platform itself. Let me just make sure I get the right one for you. Yep, there we go. Okay, cool. So this is Sumo Logic. This is our Cloud SIEM platform. What I want to do here really is just talk through this kind of security overview focused on AWS itself. Let me just get rid of that, give you a bit more real estate on the screen there. Okay, so yeah, essentially what we're looking at here then is kind of some of the key things as a security analyst that I'm interested in. We kind of split this into three. Obviously, it is split into three. I'm stating the obvious here. So, and what we'll do is we'll kind of look at these as we go through. So my top section here really is around user activity. The first thing I've got here is this kind of really cool Mapbox view of my login activity for AWS. And I have the ability here as well, to be able to drill into this a little bit further if I wanted to, and get pretty specific on where my login activity is coming from. Okay. But also coupled in with that as well, if I've got somebody logging into my environment and with that additional context of my threat intelligence feed, I can actually see, hey, this IP address is known bad. CrowdStrike is detecting this IP address as a medium malicious confidence. So I've actually got somebody logging in from that IP location that's a known bad IP address. Now, without that threat intel context to be able to give me that, that's just another user login, right? I don't know whether that's, coming from a bad IP or not. Now, there's probably something to call out here. The user logging in from that particular IP actually might not be a malicious user. It might be one of my legitimate users. But for whatever reason, their IP address is being flagged as malicious. May have been used in previous activity as malicious, okay? But it would still warrant investigation for me as a security analyst. More worryingly is the fact that I have 110 IP addresses that are associated there with a high confidence malicious rating. So again, that's definitely something there that I would be interested in investigating deeper. And this is where I would probably pivot out now to additional dashboards, start running some queries, looking at where those are connecting to, get an idea of usernames, etc. Also up here on this overview is what we call our suspicious login distances. So this is telling me that I've got a user that's logged in from the United States and also from Egypt. And it's telling me obviously the distance there. I think that's in miles. So, I've got a potential impossible travel here. And again, these are just overview dashboards, but I can pivot to other content and take a deeper look at what's happening there. Okay, so this is just a really cool kind of, typically I would probably have this on a big screen in a SOC, just to give me that kind of quick visibility. Coming down to that middle section here, we're kind of shifting our focus a little bit more now to network traffic instead of users. And what I'm able to do here is I'm looking at, my data volume sent in megabytes from S3 buckets. So I got a pretty good overview here of some spikes with my traffic, with what's happening. And again, these I can actually click and it'll pivot me out to another dashboard. It shows me the query that's based behind this particular thing. So I can now come and actually look at this in a bigger view and investigate it. What we're looking at here is a graph that's showing me my aggregated events. Now, if I wanted to look at specific messages and start doing a bit more of investigation, I can click on my messages tab. And this now brings me across into this particular view here. Okay. Now, all of my key fields are being extracted for me. So in this left-hand column here, I can check and uncheck whatever values I want. Anything that I don't see as being relevant, then I can uncheck it, to minimize my view. So some of the key things here, is here's my volume, IP address. What's the actual image or the file or whatever that I'm seeing in those logs? And then if I scroll right the way across to the right-hand side, here's my actual log message itself, okay? And what's really cool here is that you can see the format of this particular log, but within Sumo, we have the ability to just extract those key values out just to make life easy for me. I don't need to trawl through the raw log and try and find that information, but I've still got it available if I wanted to, okay? Jumping back into the overview, additionally on this center panel here, I've got information here around my GuardDuty alerts that are being generated in relation to network traffic and data exfiltration. So I've got some GuardDuty alerts here saying, hey, I've got this instance here that's communicating on port 22. And that might be unusual. I mean, it's unusual to a degree, but it might be something that, normally all of those ports would be blocked in my environment. We don't use port 22 for any kind of movement of data. So again, it gives me that quick snapshot view there of those GuardDuty alerts. Coming down here to the VPC flow. So I talked a little bit earlier on around the outlier capability, and this is exactly what we're looking at here. So this kind of shaded area, the gray shaded area that you can see, that's my normal kind of baseline of activity. That's where I would normally expect to see traffic volume ebbing and flowing, okay? The little pink triangles, those are my outliers. That's my anomalous activity. I've got dips in traffic there. So that's something, it's very easy for me to be able to view. And certainly on this side, if I've suddenly got logging stopping for a reason, that's pretty important. As equally as important, of course, as if I suddenly get a huge spike in logging to indicate I might be getting a denial of service. On the flip side, if my log source is dropping events, then I'd want to know why. What am I missing? Is something causing that to happen? Is anything happening during that period where I've stopped logging? Is somebody maliciously manipulating that to hide activity? So that outlier activity there is really cool. Similar thing, next thing there on that, the next panel is my firewall traffic. So I can look at the peaks and troughs there according to times and so on. Then coming down to the bottom panel. So this one's more around file integrity and malware, okay? So I think this is based on trend micro logs from memory, but these panels, they can all be adjusted for whatever vendor you've got. Doesn't matter whether you've got Trend Micro, CrowdStrike, McAfee, Carbon Black. you can tweak these dashboards accordingly. What I can also do here is I can actually flip these on and off. So if I only wanted to look at quarantine here, I can actually just turn off the other options. So now I can focus a little bit more on my quarantine events. Am I seeing any unusual activity here? That kind of thing. And again, we can apply outliers to any of this information. Coming over here to file integrity monitoring. Again, this will be coming off of an application or something in my environment. And I still have that ability to turn these on and off accordingly, dependent on, what I want to do. Okay. So that's really good. This is just a very quick snapshot focused on AWS. But for more kind of in-depth information, we can go back in. So, yeah, good question there. James, actually, I might get you to pop in and answer that, because I know you've been involved with a few questions around file integrity monitoring. It's probably something that you've come across a little bit more than me with customers.
Yeah, yeah, I've come across it a couple of times. There are ways to do it. Happy to discuss that with you offline. There's not an out-of-the-box app for it, because it does require some things that an app can't necessarily do on its own. So you do need to bring in the right data to perform that. But yes, we have customers today doing some file integrity monitoring using Sumo Logic. So happy to have an offline discussion about that if you need some guidance on it. So thanks.
Right, thanks, James. Ovina, so with regards to threat intel correlation based on source IPs, would VPC flow logs cover CloudTrail logs? So our threat intel, actually, we can leverage that across any of those sources that comes in. And I think as part of the session this morning, we do install the threat intel for AWS, which will give you some of that information with regards to that. That's really the answer to that question is yes, and we cover that both in the Cloud SIEM platform that I'm showing you on the screen here at the moment, and also the Cloud SIEM Advanced, because I have that additional real-time correlation to look across. So, for example, if I'm seeing a malicious IP address in any of my sources, whether it's VPC, CloudTrail, and they're coming from the same one, then I'm going to get notified of that. Okay, it's going to give me that information and say, hey, we've got a threat intel match on an IP or a URL or whatever that content might be. And then as part of that, it's going to actually list the sources that it's seeing that threat intel in. And additionally as well, if I'm seeing it in CloudTrail and VPC and maybe elsewhere in my environment, whether that's AWS centric or not, that insight clustering that I talked about will cluster those signals together, to give me a bigger picture. So I can actually start to see the flow of, if I've got a malicious IP and it's actually reaching into my environment, then my insight's going to give me, all of the related signals, so I can build that kind of end-to-end picture of what's happening. Okay. So we've talked about app catalog many times here. So let me just jump in and show you the app catalog. So yeah. Like I said, there's over 200 here in total. Around about 50% of them are security centric. We've got a quick kind of menu here on the left that just drills it down by category to make life a little bit easier. If I'm looking for anything AWS specific, for example, okay, I can just do a quick filter on AWS. And that shows me there, the ones that we've got. So some of these will be security focused, some of them will just be infrastructure focused. And then you can see this threat intel for AWS, and we'll take a deeper look at that as we go through this morning. But coming back out, I actually want to touch on something that's kind of still evolving for us. And actually, I think these are really good. So these are dedicated security focused applications around the product that you can see there. So app catalog, yeah, pretty much everything you can see there is included. There are one or two which are slightly different. And the reason is we have some apps built around things like PCI compliance. And some of those may well come with a professional services attachment because there's a lot of work involved in getting the right sources in, getting the PCI compliance stuff up and running for you. But in general, the majority of them there are included in the platform. And I have got some high-level PCI ones that I can put in that are included. So probably one thing as well, let me just pop back out of here. One thing to note, any of the ones you can see here with a little blue tick, these are actually provided by the vendor themselves. They are provided and managed. Anything otherwise is created by Sumo Logic. But we also have a pretty comprehensive community as well, where we have applications that are created by customers, and it's really easy to be able to just import those in as well and utilize those. Creating your own dashboards is pretty easy and straightforward, whether you're doing it from scratch, whether you're taking an existing one from an app catalog install and then modify it for whatever you need. Okay, that's all included. The question around CrowdStrike. So the CrowdStrike threat intel is actually included as part of the product, and that's really good. Okay, because if any of you guys have ever dealt with threat intel services, some of them can be pretty expensive. But yeah, the CrowdStrike one we do actually include in the platform, which is really cool. Okay. Come back to where we are next. So, okay, let me just switch my share back. I'm going to start populating some information into the chat window so you can all start to log in, and we'll actually go through and do a bit of a play in the platform. Let me just find my right screen to share. There we go. Cool. Okay. So what we're going to do now is let me grab these bits of information and drop them into the chat window. So here is the link for our environment. Okay. As you can see here, so for the login credentials, if you can use the training plus analyst and then any 3 random numbers, and I'll pop that in the chat. But what I think is really useful as well is as you pick your numbers and log in, if you can just populate your numbers into the chat window so that we don't get anybody doubling up. So for example, I think I've already got 419 in that environment. So let me just grab, oops, copy address. And I'll put this in for you as well, just in case you want to copy and paste it. Okay, so just, where's that come from? Sorry, the hyperlink behind the back of that is incorrect. Let me try that again. So it will be training plus analyst, then your 3 digits at sumologic.com. Okay, so that's your user that you're going to log in with, and then the password there.
Stefan?
Yeah.
It's training plus analyst instead of training underscore analyst.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'll populate it in there right now. So I got you.
It's It's one of those days today. And here's the here's the password for you. I've just realized that screenshot forward. Let me go back one. It's always a challenge when you're juggling multiple screens. Yeah, password is thanks21 exclamation mark with a capital T. Okay. All right, no worries. I'll give you guys a few minutes to be able to get in and do that. Okay. Sorry, just opened the door to my office. It was getting a bit warm in here. Okay. So hopefully you guys are all getting on okay with your numbers there. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Thank you. Just give you a couple more minutes.
During this section, it's usually helpful if you have a question to put it in the Q&A section, because then I can answer it once and everybody can read the responses. So for example, if you miss out on the password or the email address or the link to the training environment, if you pop a question in the Q&A, then I can put that answer there and you'll all be able to see it again going forward without it rolling up the chat window.
Cool. All right, okay, so hopefully you've got that information there. Just shout out if you don't. Let me just move on to the next slide. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to switch my screen across a second into the main environment, and then what we'll do is we're actually going to go through and do about 4 different activities. So the first one is I'm going to kind of show you the GuardDuty threat intel dashboard, and you guys can follow along with that as well. And like I said, while I'm kind of talking through it, please feel free to click on whatever you want in there, explore, dive a bit deeper, whatever you want to do. Then for our second activity, I'm going to talk you through installing the Threat Intel app for AWS and show you how easy it is to do that. And I'll give you a bit more information on some of the source categories that you'll need. So think of a source category as kind of a file path, right? So if we go back to old school and we're talking about servers and file shares, you know, I put all of my docs in my /docs location. So we have a similar concept with Sumo Logic, and we have some best practice guidance as well that we can share with you around that. So typically, you know, our best practice guidance would be to start off with a source category based on what environment. So it could be prod, dev, etc. Then slash, and then whatever your next part is. So if I'm logging networking, I might do prod / networking or networks /, and then if I'm bringing in VPC, I would probably do, you know, AWS VPC or just VPC. If I'm bringing in something like Palo Alto, then / Palo Alto, etc. So that's just to tell you kind of what a source category is. We'll talk a bit about those as we go through. So I just want to make sure you're kind of aware of what we're talking about. And then for a couple more activities there, we're going to just show you how some of the query-based things can give me results. And actually, see if I can just find a quick doc to share with you in the chat window, because it'll save you having to type a whole stack of things in. Let's have a quick look. Okay, that's just uploading. If somebody can confirm that you can see that file that I've just uploaded. Awesome, thank you. That's great. Okay, so just open that up, get that ready. Okay, that'll save you. You can just copy those queries in, and we'll go through those. So okay, let me switch my share again. There we go. All right, so the first one I'm going to show you here then will be the GuardDuty one itself. And so you're probably starting off with this view that you can see on the screen here. Okay, so to find the AWS GuardDuty one, if you just do a search for GuardDuty, and you can see it's the third option on my screen here. So global intelligence for Amazon GuardDuty. Okay, if you just expand that folder, and then what we'll do is we're going to go through and look at the 3 dashboards that are part of this. And there's also a query there as well, which gives us a bit more information around some of the rare threats involved. So for this first one, if you've all got that on the screen there ready with you, just click on the GuardDuty global baseline. And I'll talk a little bit around what this one is. And again, the concept of global intelligence is pretty unique actually within Sumo, because we use it within a couple of different ways. You know, we use it for GuardDuty, we use it for CloudTrail. We also leverage it in our Cloud SIEM advanced platform. Okay, and I'll make a mental note just to talk to you about that when we get that far. But essentially what happens here then is, because we're a SaaS platform, we can never get this word right. We can anomalize various bits of information from across our customer base. So when it comes to things like GuardDuty alerts, CloudTrail alerts, we can look at what's being generated across our customer base. So on this particular screen here, we've actually taken that sample over the last 7 days, and we bring that information in. So this is pretty much what we're seeing across all of our users at the moment. All of our customers. So these would be, what we're seeing with regards to the MITRE attack stages. So you can see those on the left-hand side, things like, discovery, exfiltration, impact, etc. Then there's additional ones, things like cryptocurrency, Trojan activity, and so on. And, we give that kind of really comprehensive view there of what we're seeing activity-wise. Now, I can scroll down and you can see the list of what we're detecting via GuardDuty is pretty comprehensive there at the moment. And I can click through any of these as well to show me the particular part on the dashboard itself and give further information. As I'm scrolling down through here, this is now starting to separate out the resource type. So I can see my IAM user resource type, 30% of the threat share, EC2 60%, S3 10%, etc., etc. Okay. Then coming across to here, we can actually see the severity levels of those broken down. So thankfully, 66% is low. And then my mediums and highs are obviously split across the other ones. And then again, for our customer environments, we can actually, we can use this map box here to be able to kind of drill in and drill out on where the traffic flow is being seen for these particular threats. And as per some of the other dashboards as well, I can click on any of these threat sources on the left-hand side and kind of switch them on, switch them off, just to focus down on specific ones. Excuse me. And then finally on this particular one here, Siri, go away. We can see the rare threats that I'm seeing within the environments. So, these are ones that we don't see very often. And you can actually see by the percentage levels there on that right-hand side, they're pretty low percentage-wise. And that could be for a couple of different reasons. It could be it's a new emerging threat or something that's not really being seen globally at the moment. It could be something targeted specifically to a certain geographic or a specific industry vertical. So that's why they might be classified as rare. Okay. For the second dashboard here, then what we've got is actually, what is your company like compared to the baseline? So if I bring this dashboard up, what it's going to do now is it's going to actually do some really useful comparisons here. And again, I think this is factored over 7 days or so. My snapshot is showing the last 24 hours. I think I can, let me just expand that out to 7 days. So here's something to note as well. With our dashboards, you can change your time view here at any point. I can go back to literally the last couple of minutes, right the way out to days and months, etc. And I can also, just pick something here from this option. But I could also do something like minus 45 M. Okay, so that's going to be the last 45 minutes and so on. Let me just come back to 7 days. So these particular dashboards we're looking at here then, here is my threat score. And again, this is kind of comparing me versus what we're seeing globally. So that's worrying. I have 100%, severity rating there, or 100% threat score, sorry, I should say, for my environment. What I'm also able to track as well from this activity line here is that, somewhere around the 23rd of November, my threat score went through the roof. So, clearly there's something going on in my environment. And again, as with most of our dashboards, I can actually click through, come and look at the back-end query that's running this dashboard for me. And then I have the ability here, once again, to look at that chart in a bigger screen, but I can also look at the underlying messages that are there as well. Okay. Popping back into this dashboard when my mouse decides to respond. My company versus global baseline. So this again is kind of looking at some of those MITRE attack stages. So I can see, actually, I've got a bit of an issue here with recon versus global baseline. Unauthorized access, yeah, I'm still tracking above the global baseline. So, I can see 3 key areas there where I've got an issue, probably just about 4. Trojan is just about elevating there as well. So, that gives me an opportunity now to think about where I need to go and focus. And again, I can pivot to various different dashboards to start taking a deeper look at my GuardDuty alerts and see where my particular problems are. Okay. Then as I come down through, I can start to get a bit of a breakdown here as well of my severity level. So I'm half pleased to see that my high severity actually compared to global is 0. So that's good in one way. My medium severity, I'm tracking above global baseline, and same thing with low severity. Okay, so my low severity, I'm tracking a little bit above global baseline. Okay. We also have something called an action plan. So the action plan here is going to come through and it's going to pick out some of those rare events for me and highlight those for things that I need to prioritize as part of my investigation. So for this particular example here, it's showing me there's a pen test tool in my environment that's being run. It's giving me a very quick snapshot here. You know, my severity for this one is 5. That's the resource type, IAM user. My global percentage, you know, 3.4% of prevalence globally for this one, and then a couple of other quick bits of info. Now, if I want to have a look at the information that's driving this particular action plan alert, I can click on click to findings. And what it should do is, again, it pops that query into that field, into the search field at the top. And then it will go and grab all of that relevant information for me. I'm a bit slow this morning. So it might take a second just to build that table out. There's about 294 results there. Yeah, let's give it a second. It is running slow for some reason. There we go. So again, as I mentioned on the previous dashboard we looked at earlier, you know, some of the key fields are pulled out on this left-hand side for me. So I've got the ability to, you know, to turn off anything here that I don't want, to minimize the information that's being given to me on the screen. Now, once again, as I scroll across here, you know, here is my description coming off of the GuardDuty alerts. I've got my resource IDs, etc., you know, where the region is, what the particular resource type is, whether it's an instance, access key, that kind of thing. And again, as I come right the way across, you can see some of the key pieces of information that are being exported out for me here. So it's telling me, you know, what's happening. I got a command and control server domain name query by an EC2 instance. And then once again, I've got that kind of raw log on the very end here as well. So if I want to take a look at this particular JSON log itself, I just click on the 3 dots there, excuse me, and then that will expand that log to a certain stage. If I want to expand it fully, okay, so I want to expand everything under resource, under service, etc. I just simply click on expand all. And that will actually expand that entire event out for me so that I can see all of the values populated in there, you know, IP addresses, group names, etc. Okay. So that's kind of an example of how we can pivot from, you know, something that's presented to me in a dashboard to doing a slightly deeper look, you know, using some of the queries. And I can also start adding additional query strings into here as well. You know, if I wanted to then start narrowing it down, looking for specific keywords, I can add those in, etc. Okay. So let's come back to here. I think that pretty much sums up the GuardDuty global baseline one. I've lost my dashboard. There we go. So I also have a findings analysis here as well. Just let that one populate. Again, it's kind of giving me similar information, but focused more on the findings now. So again, I've got a panel that's showing me things like rare threats, all threats in total. And then I've got a couple of map boxes here as well. So I can see where my connections are coming from, my threat connections. I can see the traffic directions and the traffic types here. And then once again, you know, for these findings, it's giving me this additional information around percentages across my resource types, the severity levels, etc. And then I've got more information here on instances and so on. Okay, so again, if I was to click on any of these, it's going to pivot me out, give me more in-depth information on what's happening. Okay. As part of this particular pack as well, this app, I have this query-based rare threats in the environment. So if I run this one, you know, this is going to go away and actually give me that information in a more query-based analysis. So here I can see I've got 20 rare threats in my environment. I've got that aggregate total there on the screen. If I click on messages, then that will take me through to the actual message screen and give me the results. Should populate in a second. There we go. Okay. And again, you know, it's extracting that key information out for me. So I can see, you know, where the source is, you know, what the GuardDuty description is, and so on. Okay. So that one is specifically based around the GuardDuty global baseline and intelligence. Let me close all my tabs in a second. Okay, so we're back at the start. All right. If you guys want to do the same thing, so just click on the three dots on any of the tabs and then select close all tabs. Okay, that'll bring you back to this nice fresh view here. And then what we'll do now for our next step is I'm going to talk you through how you actually install an app and show you how easy it is, and kind of bring that in and start looking at some information. So first thing to do then is to click on the app catalog down in that bottom left-hand corner. And so we're looking for the Threat Intel app for AWS. I think that's down the bottom. I can do a search for it, but just scroll down to the bottom. And then you'll see this powered by CrowdStrike. Okay, Threat Intel for AWS. So all I need to do is click on that app itself. Now this brings me into a view that gives me a little bit of information around what the app is. So there's a description there at the top. Okay, tells me what log sources I'm going to want to add in. So that's a good indicator to get those source categories ready. You know, we talked about those and what they were. Another really cool feature here as well is if I'm not sure that this application is what I'm looking for, I have this preview dashboard option as well. So when I click on this one, it'll give me a quick snapshot view of what the dashboards are, and then I can scroll through these as well. Okay, and I can say, yeah, actually that's what I'm looking for. Okay. Now that I've done that, all I need to do is click on Add to Library. And now it's prompting me for source category. What it might be worth doing here, actually, just to make it easy for you guys to find it yourself, is just append the app name with that 3-digit number that you put in. So I'm going to do 419. And then the first thing to do here now is to populate my source category for CloudTrail. There's a couple of options we have. I might be logging CloudTrail into lots of different locations. Okay, we talked about prod versus dev versus whatever else. If I only want to look at prod, and I know that I'm looking, you know, my category is /prod/AWS/CloudTrail, then I could type that in. If I want to include CloudTrail here from every source that I'm bringing in, I can also wildcard this as well. So to give you an example, I would just do star CloudTrail star. Okay, so that's going to cover anything before CloudTrail, anything afterwards. So I just click on that value. Then we come down to VPC flow. Now for VPC flow, I'll show you the other ways we can do it. So when I click into source category, it pre-populates a drop-down box of known values. Okay. And the one we're looking for is labs AWS VPC. So I can either just type it in simply, or I can just scroll down through here until I find labs AWS VPC. And I know it's here somewhere because I did it yesterday. Nearly there. Yep, there we go. Okay, and just select that one. And then finally, I'm going to add in the log, the source category for my ELB. Okay, so again, this is pretty similar, but this time I'm going to type it in. So it's just labs/AWS/ELB. Okay, so it's 3 different ways there that I can do it. And I can see that it's found that path for me. Just click on that one, and that's done. Okay, so I'm now populating each of those dashboards with those relevant source categories. So it's nice and easy. When I've done that part, I just click on Add to Library. And we come back then to the app catalog screen here. Now, to go in and find that dashboard, if you click on the little icon here, which is for personal, okay, you should see that, that one that you've just created there. So here's my one, threat intel for AWS and my 3 digits on the end. Okay. So again, similar thing now, when I come in here, click on any of these dashboards, they're going to kind of go through and populate with that information. By default, this one looks at the last 24 hours. If I want to go back further and I want to apply that to every panel in this dashboard, then at the very top here where it says from panel, okay, I can actually change this out. So if I select 3 days, for example, it'll then refresh back with the last 3 days of information. Okay. All right, I'm going to let you guys just go in and have a little bit of a play with this for the next 5 minutes before we jump in and just very quickly do those other 2 ones. Then what we'll do is when we've done those 2 bits, we'll do a quick recap, we'll take a break, and then when we come back from the break, we'll go into Cloud SIEM, into Cloud SIEM Advanced, and take a look at the capabilities of what that side can do for you. Okay. So, like I said, I'll give you a couple of minutes. I'm just going to pop on mute and just have a quick drink of water, and then we'll come back and move on to the next section. Cool. All right. I got a confession to make. I made a quick cup of coffee. My Nespresso machine's broken, so I feel like I've gone back in time and I have to rely on a kettle and a jar of coffee, but there we go. Life's problems. Okay, cool. So hopefully you've had a bit of a play there then with that threat intel dashboard. And it's given you a good idea of, you know, some of that information that you can gain. What I quite like about the CrowdStrike one is that it actually it's a bit of an education tool as well. And what I mean by that is, yeah, if I look at this particular panel here, and it gives me this information around threats by actor. Excuse me. So, you know, I can actually look at some of these, you know, these threat actor groups. And I think for you know, junior analysts and people that are coming into the industry, I think that's really cool because it allows me to go and do some research on these particular actor groups, get an understanding of, you know, what do these guys do? What does the malware do or the threat do? And traditionally, you know, you wouldn't really get visibility to that in a lot of platforms. So I quite like that aspect. It gives me a lot more richer information around what's happening, which is really good. Okay, let's kind of switch focus a little bit now, and I want to just very briefly touch on some query-based visibility before we kind of close off. I'm mindful we've been going for a couple of hours now without a break, so I'll make this pretty quick. So with that document that I sent out to you guys, if you want to copy that first search query, and that's the one for find successful logins and IPs that users have logged in from. Okay, open up a new search. So just click on new, log search. It'll open up a window like this one for you. Okay, and then just paste that query in, series listing in again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just run this back over the last 7 days. And I've got a gap in there, but don't worry too much. It shouldn't make a difference. And then just run that query. Excuse me. So what this is doing, it's doing an aggregation now of user logins for me. And what I'm able to see is all of the IP addresses that a certain user's logged in from, and the amount of time or the total times that user has been seen logging in. So obviously what's of interest here, even just on this very first screen, is that this user, B Smith, you know, is being seen logging in the last 7 days from a whole different stack of IP addresses there, which, you know, would be pretty unusual. Yeah, I might expect a user to log in from a handful of different IPs. Obviously, it depends on the job role and whether they're traveling, right? But this could be an indicator here that I've got, you know, shared credentials in the environment, and we all, you know, we all see things about have I been pwned, etc., where, you know, credentials are being shared in breaches and so on, and then sold on the black market. So, you know, these are some useful kind of queries around that. You know, how many times have I got a user logging in from different IP addresses? And of course, the key thing here is, you know, we're looking at this over 7 days, but what if I change that focus down? I'm going to pick 15 minutes. I'm hoping it will still generate. This is our kind of one of our classroom environments. So sometimes it doesn't quite catch the log window. But yeah, there we go. So, you know, even here, I can see that this user in a 15-minute window has logged in 48 times from all of those different IP addresses. Okay. And that's kind of, you know, that would worry me as a SOC analyst. Again, if I want to look at the raw messages, I can click on that message tab, and then that will show me all of those authentication events that are coming through from my AWS source. But if I want to now take this query and I want to add to it a little bit more. Okay, so I want to say, well, actually, I want to see where this user's logging in from. So in that document I've shared with you, so on step 2, you'll find a couple more lines that we can actually append onto this query. So we would start a new line, and for those of you on Mac, it is option return. For those of you on Windows, I'm not sure, James. I haven't been a Windows user for so many years, I'm proud to say.
But what's going on? What? Sorry.
For a new line for Windows, it's not just return, is it? It's
shift return.
Shift return. Thank you. Okay, so once you've appended those 2 new lines in there, okay, if I rerun that query, that will now actually change this view for me. So have I missed something there? James? Oh yeah, that's right.
Just our comedy routine. That's all.
Yeah, we're not really this dumb, I promise. It's because that was on the wrong line. Let me try that again. So it should go in there as 2 additional lines. Let's rerun that again. I told you I'm used to point and click, all this query-based stuff. It's no good for me. All right, still, okay. James, is that showing me what I'm expecting it to see? Because it's just showing me the latitude and longitude.
Yeah, what are you trying to do?
So I couldn't remember whether this particular query would show me the location, geolocation.
You need to use the map icon.
Okay.
So do you, yeah, just above you, just above your cursor. Yep.
That one.
Go over 3.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. It's like Dumb and Dumber here.
That's okay, man.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. So yes,
this is my wheelhouse. I probably should have been given this one. That's okay.
You're absolutely right. It's probably worth me calling out actually. When it comes to the core platform, that's not really my specialist area. Cloud SIEM Advanced is my kind of baby, and where I spend 99.9% of my time. So yes, excuse my stupidity. Hopefully it's just adding to the adding to your day. Okay, so yes, by clicking on the map icon there, you know, that gives me that ability now to pinpoint where those locations are. So, you know, once again, coming back to this user B Smith, quite clearly, you know, we've got a problem with this user. In the last 15 minutes, this guy's logging in from everywhere. Yeah, he's even logged in from Sydney down there as well. So actually, we did have a user called B Smith. I wonder if it's the same one. I digress. So that's kind of a useful kind of query-based capability there for you to do that. Okay, so hopefully you kind of got the same results there for me. Next one then is to, so we're going to test the threat intel lookup using some sample indicators of compromise. And again, this one's, you know, it's kind of a query-based search. So from that doc that I've shared with you guys, if you copy that search from that particular section. So again, just go to new log search. Okay, and then just paste that query in and then run that one. So again, I'm going to just expand that back to, let's go for 7 days and run the query. Okay, so it's returned a result there. So I can see, you know, sorry, let me just backtrack a little bit. The purpose of this query is to take a known bad IP. So maybe as part of my investigation, okay, I found this IP address in some log sources that I'm just, you know, a bit skeptical about, and I want to dig a little bit deeper. So what I'm telling this query here is, hey, use this IP address as my thread. And then I want you to go and do a lookup for me against that information. So you can see here, that it's returned that result for me, and I've got that that original log on the right-hand side. So that's telling me where, I'm seeing this particular IP in that log file. Okay. I don't want to go too deeply on this one because we could be here for hours. Certainly with me talking you through search-based queries. There's a couple of other things. I can add some additional context in here as well. So as per that document, there's a couple of optional steps there. Please feel free to have a play with that. You've got access to this environment that you can have a little play with. We do reset the passwords frequently, but by all means, you'll have a little bit of time to be able to come in here and have a play with what we've got in the platform, etc. Okay. So with that, what I want to do now is just switch focus back to do, I think, a quick recap, and then we'll take a break. So let me just change my screen. There we go. Okie dokie. All right, no problem. Okay, so here's kind of our key takeaways of Cloud SIEM that we've looked at so far today. So we've kind of looked at this search capability, how we can do deep searching. I can do some foundational correlation and alerting, being able to leverage things like outlier detection, and log reduce, log compare, etc., to be able to look for differences in log files and that kind of thing. Data enrichment and visualization. So we've kind of gone through, talked about how we can very quickly implement those dashboards. So again, although this session today is primarily aimed around AWS, you would have noticed it in our application catalog. We've got stuff there for pretty much all of the things you're going to come across in your environment. If you're running Palo Alto firewalls, then we've got dedicated Palo Alto apps, both from an operational side and I think from a security side. If you're running Windows, whether it's on-premise Active Directory or whether you're running Windows Azure, then again, there's dedicated apps for those, some of them with more of a security focus than others. Okay. And, we saw how quickly I can get that up and running, which is really, really, really good. I've spent far too many hours in the past on SIEM platforms having to build useful dashboards from scratch, whereas, the content we have there is ready to go. And also using that kind of advanced analytics, using threat intelligence that's built in and so on. We kind of talked you through how you can look at dashboards, drill down, pivot, and then obviously using query-based searches there as well. Okay, so that's kind of that quick recap on Cloud SIEM. So what I think we'll do now is we will take, what do we like for time? Let's take a 20-minute break. I know it said 15 minutes, but let's say 20 minutes, come back at 11:40. I'm still going to be here. James will still be here. So, if you guys have got any questions or anything you want to ask, please feel free to do that. If you want to carry on playing with the environment you've got in front of you, by all means, you can do that. If you need to go and make a cup of coffee with an old school kettle like I did, then go away and do that one. And then we'll see you back in 20 minutes. And show you the Cloud SIEM Advanced. And I think you guys are going to be pretty blown away with what you see on that platform. So thank you for the first couple of hours that you guys have had with us, and look forward to talking to you more in a short while. Thank you. Okay, a couple more minutes, everyone, and then we'll restart.
Hey, Dale, if you're out there listening, there's a, I don't know if this is in the lab environment or not, but in the app catalog, if you are on the left-hand side, and maybe, Stefan, if you're showing your screen, maybe you can navigate here and we'll see if it's in the lab environment. If you go to the Sumo Logic Solutions category down near the bottom in the app catalog. Yeah, there. And then click on the software development optimization. So Dale, this is what I was mentioning in my answer to your question. This is a DORA-based application, and you can have a look at it through here. I don't know that there's any data in the lab environment that supports this, but I do have data in the demo environment. If you do want to see this later, feel free to reach out. I'll pop my email in the chat so you guys can reach me. Hopefully that answers your question about everything there.
Awesome, thanks, James. And yeah, thanks, Dale. So, some good questions there. So hopefully the information that we've shared with you will answer that for you. Okay, cool. All right. Hopefully you've had a good 20-minute break and time to grab a coffee or a bite to eat or something. So I've just had confirmation with regards to AWS credits and the Uber Eats. Those will be sent out to you by email post webinar. You should also get a link to the recording, and that should also include a link to all of the slides that we have here as well. So that should be good for you to recap on any information. Okay, let me change my share back if I can find it. There we go. All right, cool. Okay. So yeah, for the first part of the session, then obviously we've gone through and talked about Cloud SIEM. And what we're going to go through and talk about now is it's kind of our Cloud SIEM advanced part of the product. Okay, this is particularly where I'm. This is my responsibility for the APJ region, and for me, it kind of resonates really strongly, having come from a security operations background, and also, you know, having spent time as a SOC analyst, I've also been involved in building managed service SOCs and helping kind of optimize security operations and so on. You know, when I joined Sumo Logic, this particular aspect of the product that we do kind of really did resonate with me, because as I discussed this morning, you know, one of the biggest challenges is around that alert fatigue that we suffer from. And, you know, I've worked where I've lost a lot of really good SOC analysts because unfortunately they just got tired with the noise and the volume that was being generated. So this kind of addresses that, and it's really cool. Okay. So some of the key things really here, you know, again, as per our core platform, you know, our Cloud SIEM platform, Cloud SIEM Advanced was born and built in the cloud. So it has that scalability. Again, you know, going back to a problem we discussed earlier, where you might get something like a denial of service attack, then the last thing I want is for my SIEM platform to grind to a halt, okay, to stop dropping events because it can't handle the ingest volume. So by having that cloud native solution, it ensures that, you know, in the back end, we automatically scale up compute and resourcing for it to handle that load. When I'm done with that load, we just drop that down again. For those of you who are familiar with kind of, you know, EPS terminology, we have a particular customer in the US who they handle the event monitoring for a specific pretty big sporting event every year. On the evening of that particular event, those guys burst through to 15 million events per second. And that's immense, right? You know, I've worked with plenty of customers logging around 16,000 events per second, and that's pretty big. But to be able to burst through to something like 15 million events per second and not drop any of those, not impact any other customers is a really good point, you know, within the product. So Cloud SIEM Advanced is focused purely on security events. You know, it correlates threats in real time. So as soon as my events are coming in, it's looking at those events, it's looking at the entity in each event, and it's doing that tracking of the entity. We talked a little bit about that earlier. So an entity for us is, you know, it could be a user, could be an IP address, host name, MAC address, or any other custom attribute that I want to assign as an entity. I can go in and do that as well. So obviously we have the ability here to correlate across operating systems, EDR solutions, IDS, IPS, firewall, network traffic, spam filters, email, cloud, you name it, we can bring it in. Natively out of the box, you know, we again support, you know, hundreds of vendors. We have around 450 plus out of the box correlation rules. Within that platform, those rules can be anything from a simple high severity firewall alert coming off of Palo Alto right the way through to a basic correlation, 10 failed logins followed by a success. Okay, so those are kind of included in those signals that we generate. To get the logs themselves in, they actually come from the core product, and I'll go through that in a couple of slides and talk about how we bring those across and what we do with that event as it comes in. There is a couple of things I do want to call out though. So Cloud SIEM Advanced is really designed for dedicated security operations teams. You know, this is designed to be the tool that you use day in, day out, for your, for your central point of real-time correlation, for your workflow, for that automation aspect of the investigation phase. To be able to do that as well, it does require reasonable log volume to come through. We generally find our sweet spot is around about 50 gigabytes per day of multiple log sources coming in. But there can be some variances to that. Depends on the log type, The key thing really is making sure that, the log sources you feed into Cloud SIEM give you that complete end-to-end visibility. So if I take something like a phishing attack, I need to be able to have, my email logs coming in initially. User clicks on a hyperlink in the email, so I need to have visibility over that. If they download something and then execute something on an endpoint, then having those EDR logs, are pretty useful there as well. Okay. So the UI, which you can briefly see there as well, is what we call our heads-up display. And again, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys a login to this platform and let you have a play and actually work through an investigation as well. To give you an idea of what we can do. So this funnel of fidelity that you can see on the screen here, this was actually from a real customer proof of value that we did. And it was based over 45 days. So for this particular customer, over 45 days, they ingested 10 billion plus logs or events into the platform. When they come in to Cloud SIEM Advanced, we call those records. And I'll kind of talk to that a little bit more in the next slide. Those records then get applied across those out-of-the-box rules that I talked about. Okay, so it managed to kind of grind 9.8 million security alerts from those 10 billion events. That's where most SIEM platforms stop. Okay, they are set to alert on things they see. Whether that's, again, a single alert, high severity alert from a firewall, or whether it's a basic correlation. That's where those platforms are designed to stop. And, that's where, as a SOC analyst, I'm expected to go in and do my day-to-day investigation. And you'll recall I mentioned, working with a customer in Canberra a few years ago, where those guys were generating around 9 million events a day. With a team of about five analysts. And it's just an impossible task. With the best will in the world, there's no way you can go through. So you end up either cherry picking certain events, which might not be the ones that you really need to focus on, or you end up with a platform that sits there and it churns out all of this noise and you just ignore it completely. Okay. So we address that using our insight clustering capability. And again, as I touched on this earlier, what that really does is it looks at the signals that are passing through, looks at the entity involved, the user, the IP, and every one of those signals will have some element of a severity score associated with it. It then starts to take that entity. It looks at the severity score. It looks at when it was generated in relation to other signals and that 14-day look back window, if you recall, I talked about. Then when that severity score reaches a set threshold, it's about 13 points out of the box, but that can be adjusted depending on the environment. It clusters all of those relevant signals together and it creates an insight. Okay. So now I have a single thing to focus on. But when I go in and look at that insight, it actually contains all of the relevant security alerts. At the same time as the insight is generated, it also does some enrichment and context addition as well. And we talked about how important context is. So, now for this particular customer, from 9.8 million signals, we generated 175 insights over 45 days. From the 175, 95 were deemed as no action. Okay, no action meaning it was normal behavior. An administrator might have done something, but it's part of their day-to-day job. Okay. 15 of those were classed as false positive. And as with any SIEM platform, they would require further tuning, investigation, do I need it, etc. But actually, out of the 175 insights that they generated, 65 of those were real incidents that they found. And again, this is within, a proof of concept environment. So I guess a good question there to kind of think about is, how long would it take you to go from 10 billion plus events down to 65 things to investigate? And that's the problem with a lot of the current legacy SIEM platforms, or not even having a SIEM platform, right? And again, I've worked in many environments where I've had a dozen different tools to pivot to. And in reality, my SIEM has actually been a set of yellow Post-it notes on my desk. Okay, I've written down an IP address here and a timestamp, and then a username and a timestamp here. And you start to, stick them on your desk and correlate manually. And it just, sometimes it's impossible. You will never get to finding those 65 incidents out of that many alerts coming through. So it's very effective at what it does. So let's understand the data pipeline a little bit. Essentially what happens is the log sources come in using the collectors that we talked about in the core platform. Okay, so they can be hosted, they can be locally installed, etc. Those events come into the core product, the core solution, our continuous intelligence platform. At that particular point there, I'm at the stage where I can leverage all of those dashboards that we've looked at this morning. Okay. If I then want to forward those across for the additional processing of Cloud SIEM Advanced, we simply forward those across. And that might be something as simple as ticking a box on the collector that says forward to SIEM. What happens then is, let me click here. I've forgotten, this will actually step me through as I'm talking. So then what happens is those events come across, okay, they get ingested into the platform, and then they're what we call messages in that raw state. The next thing is they hit Cloud SIEM Advanced, and then Cloud SIEM Advanced will take those messages, it's going to parse them, it's going to map them to our schema within Cloud SIEM. So obviously, again, those of you familiar with SIEM platforms, you have a schema where it doesn't matter what the field is that's got a username in there, it'll be normalized to a username field in the SIEM platform. So we parse, we map, and then we also do enrichment at that level as well. So as an example, if I've got a log that's come in that has an external IP address, or it's got a URL or a domain name, we will go and populate that information using an ASN lookup. Okay, so we will populate an IP address with the geolocation, who the ISP is, that kind of thing. We also do some additional things as well. We do entropy scoring against domain names, and we populate that into the what we call the record at this stage. Then the next stage is that those records get passed across our rules engine, and those were that kind of 450 plus rules out of the box. We can customize those, by the way. If I'm ingesting a log source, it's a custom log source from a customer, I can create an ingest mapper and custom rules and have it reporting in a very short period of time. One example I can think of was a customer portal, which was doing custom logging. And from ingest to firing and detecting, bad activity for that customer was about 30 minutes of creating that content. So it's designed to be as quick and easy as possible. And again, that kind of goes back to something else I talked about earlier, around that SIEM engineering, content engineering aspect. Sometimes you have to have like a full-time person just managing the content in the SIEM platform, doing the tuning, creating content. Whereas we streamline that for you as easily as possible. Okay. The last step then really is around this insight clustering. We call it correlation here on this slide, and it is obviously to a degree, but we also do some correlation at that signal level as well. Okay. Once those insights are generated, then that becomes an actionable security investigation. And that's where my SOC analysts are going to look at those and go in and do their day-to-day investigation. That's where I start my day. I start with my insights, I work through them, do whatever I want to do. Once I've done that, I can do threat hunting. I can threat hunt in Cloud SIEM Advanced, looking at those signals that are being generated. I can prioritize on severity. I can do searches on usernames, whatever you normally would do with threat hunting. Or I can pivot back to Cloud SIEM, which is what we looked at this morning. And then I can do deep searches there. I can just search for something as simple as an IP address against every log source I'm bringing in, whether I'm forwarding it across to Cloud SIEM Advanced or not. Okay, so I can leverage both platforms for doing things like threat hunting, etc. Excuse me. And that brings us then to this next part where I'm going to get you guys to log in. What I would recommend is, if you still have your session open from this morning, can you go and click on the username down the bottom and click on sign out? Okay, because we're going to use a different account to log in this time. And I want to make sure that everything I show you on the screen is what you guys are going to see. So if you can do that as a first action, just click on your username down there and click on log out for me. Okay. Then let me grab this URL information once again. Make sure I'm telling everybody, yep. Okay, so there's your URL. I think it is actually the same as the one this morning. And the user we're going to use this time, we're all going to use the same one. Okay, so you don't need to append this with any additional numbers. So it's just training plus insights at sumologic.com. Oops. Okay. And the password should be what's on the screen, I hope. So Sumo Logic, exclamation, there you go. Okay, cool. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. If somebody can just give me a thumbs up or something to say that you can get in there. Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to take you through a guided investigation. So I'm going to pick an insight in the platform, take you through how I would investigate it as a SOC analyst. Okay, and then we'll talk about what we've seen, what conclusion we would come to, and then what action we would take. Once I've done that, I'm going to give you an insight number to go and investigate. So I get you to do pretty much the same thing. Okay, have a look at the insight, look at the signals in there, make a conclusion from what you're seeing. And then I'll give you a few minutes and we'll kind of regroup and talk about what you've seen in that platform. So let me just flip my screen again. Hang on a second. All right, cool. Okay, so you guys should all see my Cloud SIEM advanced console there in front of me. So, okay, let's give you a quick overview then of what we're seeing here. If you've never seen, if you've never seen, I nearly said seen, if you've never seen our Cloud SIEM advanced platform before, it's glaringly obvious, right? It's quite different to anything else that you would have seen. The actual UI was designed by one of the game designers from World of Warcraft. The main aim really was that the whole platform was designed by SOC analysts for SOC analysts. It's designed to make my workflow and investigation as easy as possible. Okay, my key pieces of information are here on the screen for me, which I'll talk about in a second. For me, one of the main things, right, is when you have this on a big SOC dashboard in the SOC, it's one of the coolest things you can see. We all know about pew pew maps, and you know, every SOC has one of those on the screen, right? But this is so much better because this is real information that you're looking at here. This is information from your environment. It's not synthetic, you know, who's attacking who type things, as cool as they are. Anyway, so yeah, looking at this information here, top left-hand corner, these are those record signals insights that we kind of covered a second ago. So I'm literally taking 635,000 records from the core platform. Okay, I'm applying those over the signal rules engine. That's generating 652 signals. And then from those signals in the last 24 hours, okay, I've generated 3 insights. So these are those 3 insights that I need to go and investigate as a SOC analyst. On this left-hand side as well, we've also got some metrics here that we record. So things like mean time to detect, mean time to respond, mean time to remediate. That's just like a snapshot view. We actually pass all of that information back into the core platform, and we have some really comprehensive SOC KPI dashboards in there, okay, which again reflects that. How long am I taking to detect things? How's my trend going on that? You know, am I getting better? Am I getting worse? Which of my SOC analysts are working on the most tickets? And also importantly, because everything we do within this platform is aligned with a MITRE attack stage, it also tells me, you know, where my MITRE attack stages are most prevalent in my environment. And you'll recall we actually did see some of that with the threat intel dashboards that we looked at earlier. But this is more of a, you know, what I'm seeing from these correlated events. So in the center there is pretty much the same information shown again. Outer ring is my records coming in. Okay, the inner ring are my signals being generated. And I also have the ability to click through at any of these points as well to go into that into that corresponding UI. And then finally, those are my my insights that you can see that are there. And again, I can click on them here, or I can take a different view. Top right-hand side is my latest insight that's been generated. Okay, this is kind of a baseball card view of what's happening. So, you know, here's my insight name. The number is sequential, so the next one will be 752, for example. Command and control is that MITRE attack tag that we apply. Dana, you're not seeing any of this in your view? Okay, sorry. In this view, okay, fundamental flaw here, and I really do apologize for those of you who haven't realized it. You need to click on Cloud SIEM Enterprise down in the bottom left-hand corner. Okay, and that should take you in there. So if you can just confirm that you've got it. Thank you. I sincerely apologize. I missed that step for you. Okay, great. All right, so back into this one then. Yeah, so my baseball card view there really is kind of giving me that snapshot of that insight at a very high level. So it's telling me who the entity is. It's a user called Rico Dynamite in this case. I'm not sure where we get these names from, but there you go. The crosshair in the middle is my kind of timeline on the horizontal axis. And then the severity levels are on that vertical axis, okay. It also tells me how many signals are part of this insight, which is that 4 signals you can see, the overall severity of this particular insight, how many days it was detected over. So again, this is a good example of that low and slow capability and that 14-day kind of active look back window. So this particular insight here was tracked over 10 days. Lastly here, unfortunately, this doesn't generate in this particular environment I'm looking at the moment. We also have global intelligence across our Cloud SIEM advanced platform. Now that works in a similar way to what we talked about in the other platform, where for all of our Cloud SIEM advanced customers, okay, we take statistics around insight generation and how they close insights. So if I have an insight and I close it as false positive, or I close it as no action, or as a true incident, we anomalize that information, okay? We then apply that across all of our customers. So in reality, what you would normally see here is a score from 0 to 95, I think it goes up to. And that's a confidence rating of how confident we are that this particular insight is a real incident, okay? So again, there's a couple of really good benefits there. One, obviously, it gives me a chance to prioritize what's serious in my environment. But again, from a training perspective, you know, if I'm bringing in junior SOC analysts, or I'm training somebody up from another department in the organization, by applying a confidence score to that, it allows them to look at the signals that are being generated and then, you know, kind of understand how that confidence score was derived. So I think that they're good kind of training aids, as well as being obviously useful in the way we detect and prioritize events. Finally, in the right-hand corner there, that's just my activity around, you know, insights being generated. Which of my SOC analysts are assigning those incidents or those insights to themselves, etc. Okay. So that's the main heads-up display. Let's jump into the insight view. So this is what we call our Kanban view board, and I can actually change my view depending on how you're used to working with. So I can go to a list view there, or I can just stick with my Kanban board. I quite like this view because it makes my workflow nice and easy. Okay. And by all means, you know, hopefully you guys are following this, not just on my screen, but with what you've got in front of you. So, you know, when it comes to assigning any of these insights, if I wanted to assign these to don't use, I don't know who's called it that, I can literally just drag that across. And when I release it, okay, it's reassigned it to that group. As an example here, new and in progress are kind of default ones, okay? But I can customize the other columns. I can have, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I can have specific analyst names there as well. So you've got your own personal stack on that board, okay, to assign to yourself. So let's take a look at one of the insights, and I'll talk you through now. So now I'm kind of switching over and putting my SOC analyst hat on. And the insight that I want to take you through would be this insight 746. Okay, so to view any insight, you just click on the insight itself, and then this takes me into what I would call my workbench view. Okay. Over on the left-hand side, top part of this really is more to do with my workflow, and we'll come back to that in a second. The middle section here really is giving me more information that we saw on that snapshot view. So severity level, what's the entity involved? The global confidence score, where it's applicable. Signal data, how many signals are part of this insight, etc. Okay. I also have the ability down here to add tags. I can add comments as part of my investigation and so on. Okay. We'll come back to that in a second. So here's my main view now, and I have just noticed, and I'm going to apologize for this thread intel signal at the very top here, actually, there's, it shouldn't be at the top, it should be further down. I think there's a timestamp problem there. So normally what would happen for this particular insight is, it should start off with proof points. You know, one of those days today, it really is. It should really start off with my proof point alert at the top. Okay, so essentially what's happened is my users received a phishing email. Okay, and I have my alert that's come from my proof point log source. Then essentially what happens is I then get a checkpoint alert coming through to say that a malicious file was allowed. Okay, so again, that's direct from checkpoint, but because we're kind of tracking on the entity here, I should be finding a consistent value in each of these. And my consistent value is this IP address over here on the left-hand side. Okay, so I can see it's here. I can see it's here. As I scroll down again now, I've got my CrowdStrike alert here. Okay, and again, there's that IP address, that entity that we're tracking. And I would normally expect somewhere after the checkpoint alert to see my thread intel, and the thread intel would populate because it's seeing a file hash in the log file. It's doing an automatic lookup on ingest, and it's going, hey, this file hash is known bad, and it triggers that alert. Okay, so my apologies that it's slightly out of sync, but normally that I'd expect to get a thread intel when I'm first seeing that file come into the system. So now as a SOC analyst, what I can do here, right, if I wanted to look at any of these in depth, I can actually click on the specific signal. And there's some useful information in here. So one is that it gives me a description around what this signal is. So again, you know, I can understand a little bit more around why it was triggered. It's great for that education piece. It's telling me the severity level, the actual rule itself that triggered, that created this signal to fire. And then as I scroll down, I can see some key pieces of information being extracted into what I would call the header of this particular signal. So it's telling me, you know, what was the action? Click permitted. What was the URL? Here we go. What's the name of the threat and who was the user involved? Okay. As I scroll down a little bit further, you can see all of the normal fields you'd expect to get in this alert that's come from Proofpoint. Now, any one of those field values, okay, as a SOC analyst, if I find those useful, then I can click on the little star that appears next to it, should appear next to it. And then what it does is it calls it a favorite field. I think this is because I'm logged in with a different account, and it would normally populate it up here into this header for me. Okay, so I've got that quicker snapshot view of what's happening. Anyway, so that's my deeper view of each signal. Let me just come back up a level. And again, let's kind of look at this as a very quick workflow. So I've got a user that's received an email. Okay, then I've got a checkpoint alert to say that the file was allowed. So clearly they've clicked on the link. Then I've got a detection summary event. So CrowdStrike is saying, hey, a file's been detonated on the endpoint, laptop, desktop, whatever it was. Okay. And it's giving me the name of the file and all of the other relevant information. So again, I can click on any of these and work my way a little bit deeper. So the key thing here really is, as a SOC analyst now, I have all of the relevant signals clustered together to tell me very quickly what's happened. I can tell you from experience, having worked in a SOC and spent many hours trying to protect users from phishing emails and whatever, you know, normally this might have taken me a couple of hours to investigate because I might have got an alert from somewhere. And I'll be honest, most likely, given the log sources I had at the time, it would have been an alert from my endpoint security to say malware detected. So then what I'd have to do, let me just take a quick sip of my coffee. Then what I'd have to do is I'd have to look at that endpoint security alert. Who was the user? what's the name of the file? Then I'd have to go and do a search against that user or against that file name and look at the timestamps for those files, right? And actually try and find an entire event stack in a short period of time where there's a rough correlation of all of those events. And hence it could take me at least 2 hours to manually go through and do that. Even with a legacy SIEM platform, I'm likely to still have to do the same thing. You know, I would have got an endpoint security alert, or I might have got a firewall alert or something, but then I'd have to do some searching and correlate on the user. Here I've been able to investigate this and come to a conclusion in around 2 minutes. So the key thing here now is, as soon as I get this alert into the platform, okay, and I'm only taking a couple of minutes to investigate, I'm in that position now to reassign this to somebody to go and do the remediation step. More likely it's going to be something like a full endpoint security scan, or I might quarantine the endpoint off the network. The better I can minimize the exposure time of that malicious file in my environment, the better it is, right? Because I don't know what that malicious file is doing. So instead of taking 2 hours to come to the conclusion that I need to go and get that removed, if I can do that in 2 minutes, I can have the whole thing done and dusted in 10 minutes, okay? So I'm almost, you know, literally 2 hours less exposure time of that in my environment. And that similarly applies to pretty much any other kind of threat we have coming through. The quicker I can detect it, the quicker I can investigate it and validate that it is real and remediate, the better it is obviously for my environment. So that's kind of a quick snapshot view of how I would investigate that. Once again, apologies for the fact that that threat intel's in the wrong place. I talked a little bit around enrichment as well. So here, for example, I have a recorded future integration, but equally here, I could be pulling information from my EDR solution. So if I've got Carbon Black, I've got Sentinel-1, I could be populating that information in here as additional enrichment. If I've got a virus total API key, then I can plug that in. And then I'd also have virus total results here, where it might have gone off and done a lookup against the file hash or an IP, etc. Again, the primary point here is to minimize the amount of time I have to pivot out to other systems. I don't need to copy a file hash and go to virustotal.com and paste it in and do that search. I can pull all that information in for me. Okay, now that I've investigated it, you know, I come back to my workflow piece. At this stage, I would either assign it to me or assign it to somebody else. If I'm happy that I don't need to do anything with it, you know, maybe it was not a true incident, I could just close it off at this stage. Here for me, what I'm likely to do is to go to actions and then reassign this to another team, okay? So I might have a dedicated Slack channel set up for my desktop team or whoever looks after my endpoint security side. And then I can push this across to them, okay, for remediation. They'll get a link to this particular insight, and then they can come in and close it. I can push it to something like ServiceNow. If I also have the ServiceNow Security Incident Responder product, I think that's right, then I've got two-way integration. Okay, I can send this across as an incident into ServiceNow. Subsequently, when I close it in ServiceNow, it'll come back and close it here for me as well. Okay. But as its most basic, I can do all of that workflow within this product. I can investigate it, I can close it. Okay. So with that, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get you guys to actually go through and do an investigation. Just before I do that, let me just jump to this slide, just to recap around signal clustering. I just want to cover that a little bit more. So these were the signals that we saw as part of that insight, okay? User received phishing email, checkpoint alert, threat intel match, granted it was out of order, And then we have that CrowdStrike alert as well. So if you look at the severity points for each of those, when we add those together, they come to 15 points. Okay. You'll probably or hopefully recall earlier that I said that, you know, we trigger anything above 12 points. So 13 points onwards of severity when clustered together will create that insight. Sometimes it can take a couple of weeks to generate an insight if I've got a low and slow activity going on. Sometimes I can have a single signal fire and the severity is high enough that it will generate an insight straight away. Case in point, working with a customer recently, we just added in AWS CloudTrail, and I had an insight generate in just under 5 minutes of actually sending that log source in. So it's all very much dependent on the severity of, you know, what's being generated in your environment.
Hey, Stefan,
yeah.
Quick question for you, because I just tried logging in with those credentials and accessing CSE, and I get a blank page.
That's just Sumo Logic. Okay.
Sumo Logic.
It's because you're probably not authenticated through our Zscaler VPN. Okay.
No, that's the training plus insight at sumologic.com.
Correct. Yes, you need to have your Zscaler VPN connected. And actually, that's a good point to raise that, because sometimes if I've got customers on a call or we're doing a webinar and you can't access it, you get a blank screen. Sometimes it's because you're connected to a corporate VPN or something, okay, and it's blocking you from going to that site. So if ever you're on one of our webinars and you go to a link that we send you and you get a blank screen or something, it might be because of your corporate VPN. But that's the case, James. You'll need to re-authenticate your Zscaler to get back in.
I thought I was, but I'm not. I thought it might be happening to somebody else as well. So
yeah, no.
Cool.
Hopefully it's just you.
Hopefully.
Okay. All right. Cool. So yeah, so as we can see there, you know, we're up to 15 severity points, and then obviously that's triggered that through into that cluster. As a quick recap there again, you know, those were the signals we saw on the left-hand side, and then the conclusion we came to was that the users likely, you know, had a successful phishing attack, or not the user has, but they've been a subject to a successful phishing attack. Okay. And those were those kind of last steps in that workflow that we talked about. Okay. Let me step through these a second. So these are that workflow, and bear this in mind as well for what you guys are going to do on your own in a second. So the first thing is to look at the insight, and I'll give you the insight name to look at. Otherwise, you'll be there for hours trying to find the right one. Then you examine each of the signals that are part of that insight itself. Okay, make a conclusion on what you're seeing. And I'm going to give you guys like 5 minutes or so to actually, you know, come to that conclusion. And then we'll come back and review what you saw. And then hopefully, you know, you'll come to the same conclusion that that I did when I looked at that particular one. And then finally, you'd have your taken action. You know, you would email it to another team, send it to a Slack channel, that kind of thing. Okay. And then essentially as a SOC analyst, you would repeat the whole thing again. So you'd go back to your next insight, follow that flow through. It's all pretty straightforward. Okay. All right, so I'm going to let you guys loose now to do this one yourself. So the insight that I'd like you to take a look at is called Insight 748. Let me just double check I can see it in my environment. I'm not going to share my screen for this one. I'm just going to leave it on this presentation slide and let you guys go in. Yeah, so I can see it there. Insight 748, command and control. Okay, the entity is recode.dynamite, duration 10 days. So hopefully you can find that one there. So if you can find that one, click on it, work your way through, okay, make some mental notes of what you think the, what's happened, and then what would you do as a remediation step, okay? I'll give you 5 minutes. Let's look at this one again, just on half past, so just under 5 minutes to kind of investigate that, and then we'll recap where we are. Cool. Okay, guys, we are just coming up to 1/2 so hopefully, hopefully you've had a chance to go in and have a look at that one. I need a new voice. Okay. Let me just step through these slides. So hopefully you kind of followed that workflow through. Okay, followed the workflow through. So we go in and we pick our insight to investigate. We then go through and kind of examine each of the signals that are part of that insight cluster. Okay, make our conclusion on what we think's happened in this particular incident, and then you kind of step through and take your action, update the status, and so on. Okay, so. I guess first question is, were you able to successfully investigate it? If you're kind of putting on a SOC analyst hat, hopefully you found it quite easy to be able to go in and just kind of follow that simple workflow and see how easy it is. you know, to go in and do that investigation. You know, it's pretty straightforward. And then the second question really is kind of around what, you know, what did you guys find? What were some of the signals that were generated as part of that cluster? So let me just jump on to, actually, no, before I jump onto the next screen, I'm going to ask somebody to just pop into the chat window, just one of those signal names that you found in that insight, just so I make sure you were all looking at the right one. So if anybody wants to just type in one of the signal names. Go on, don't be shy. Thanks, Dana. Absolutely, yes. So terminated AD account from an AWS API call was one of those signals that were generated. Absolutely. Okay. So taking a look then here from this particular investigation, you know, there were kind of three of the key signals there. The threat intel match from an AWS API call. Okay. So that's a good example where we're leveraging threat intelligence that's coming into that platform. And, you know, that kind of overlays every signal we come in. Okay, so we got threat intelligence looking at a signal from AWS that sees an IP address that says, hey, this IP is known bad. Okay. Another signal there as well, an API call from a terminated Active Directory account. Then we're seeing network firewall high severity alert saying that the user agent was a known malicious user agent. Okay, and as Ovina has said there, you know, the other one is a credential exfiltration coming from a GuardDuty alert. So hopefully you kind of came to the same conclusion to me, and if you didn't, and I've got this wrong, I think I'm in the wrong job, but hopefully to me what it looked like was that I've got a terminated employee, and what's happened here is that my employee's been terminated, but they still have access to AWS. Okay. And for whatever reason, you know, perhaps this guy wasn't happy with the fact he's been dismissed, or he was an insider threat or something. This guy still has access to AWS and he's doing something malicious. He's using a known bad IP, you know, maybe through a VPN to hide his location. He's using a known bad user agent to access it, again, to try and mask certain things. So from that particular insight and that kind of conclusion that we come to, obviously the next step there is to take an action. So, you know, as an action for me, the very first thing either I would do or I would get somebody else to do is to actually go and get that AWS account locked, deleted, suspended, whatever I want to do. Okay. But as a consequence to this, and I think this is probably quite an important thing, is obviously somewhere in my process for terminating employees, we've missed a step, right? You know, we've terminated our Active Directory account, but somewhere we may have either forgotten about AWS access, or we haven't followed process and we haven't terminated their AWS access account. So that's, you know, that's kind of a worthwhile thing to note with this particular incident. So a good question there is, you know, thinking about current tools and processes that you might have, you know, how long would it take you to kind of detect that activity? You know, when we look at this particular insight, it took 10 days, right? Because again, this terminated employee was spacing out his activity, but I was still able to track it and piece all of that together. But elsewhere in an environment, you know, maybe in the environments that you guys have, or some of the ones I've certainly worked in, I might have got a single alert somewhere with one of those steps. And then the question is kind of how long would it take me to, or how long would it take you to build that picture of what's happened? Okay. You know, again, going back to that, I've got an IP or I've got a username or I've got an instance name. And then I have to start trawling my events to see where's the correlation between the two. Now, I know as a SOC analyst, it's all too easy to kind of think of that. Well, if I've got a user that's just, you know, made an API call, then it's likely I'm going to be looking for other activity around that same time frame. But in this case, that's not the case. You know, between the API call, threat intel, and the terminated account and the credential exfiltration, there's several days in between those. So it's likely that I might never come to a conclusion when I'm manually trying to piece this together, because I might look and go, well, actually, you know, I don't see any other activity around this 24-hour window. Or, you know, if I broaden my search, then again, like I said earlier, you end up with lots of Post-it notes on your desk, you know, trying to correlate manually those bits of information together. So, you know, again, it kind of shows the power, I think, of, you know, of Cloud SIEM Advanced and that insight clustering capability, how it's able to automate that investigation phase for me and save a huge amount of time. Okay. So pretty much that kind of sums up where we are with this session. So just as a quick recap on Cloud SIEM Enterprise, okay, we kind of seen how, you know, how our insight clustering is able to take literally millions or thousands of alerts, distill that down a little bit into signals, and then bring that right down into a really manageable number. In this particular environment, you know, we had how many insights over the last 24 hours? Let me just go back a second. 3, I think it was. Now, you know, in my time as a SOC analyst, I've always I've had this mantra of no more than 10 incidents per analyst per day. Because based on an 8-hour shift, that gives me about 40 minutes to investigate an incident, come to a conclusion, and close that off. Okay. And that's like a really tight, impossible task. We've already kind of discussed how some of those can take 2 hours. Really complex ones can take a lot longer. You know, if I've got something spaced out over weeks, it could take me a couple of days to come to that conclusion. So by having this insight capability and automating that for me, you know, it brings it down to a more manageable number. It gives me time now as a SOC analyst. If I come in and I've got 3 things to investigate, I can spend the rest of my time working on other things, either threat hunting for other stuff, revising policies to do with security operations, or tuning platform or whatever. You know, it frees up time. And because I'm not non-stop solid for 8 hours, there's less likelihood that I'm going to turn around and go, I've had enough of this and I'm off. Okay, because we know that resourcing is a major challenge. The other thing there is, you know, investigating the threats. We've kind of, you know, by being able to enrich that information at the time that everything is created is really important as well. Again, as I said, it saves me having to copy and paste IP addresses into somewhere and copy files around, you know, and look up against external sources. You know, I can do that with integration within the platform itself, which is really cool. And then finally, being able to automate actions. So, you know, as part of that workflow within the platform itself, we have got some basic automation. I can leverage HTTP, excuse me, a HTTP post, for example, and get it to do something, you know, once I've investigated. Find some water. I think my voice only works for a few hours a day. I'm sorry about this. Excuse me. But what I can also do is I can leverage SOAR platforms as well. My apologies, my voice is going. So yeah, I can use something like an external SOAR platform, or I can use the Sumo Logic built-in one as well. And this is embarrassing, my throat is really going. Let me move on to the next slide. Okay, a couple of other really useful things as well. So when it comes to platform tuning, with my signals and my rules that I have within Cloud SIEM Enterprise, on a lot of traditional platforms, if I needed to modify an existing rule, I'd have to go in and copy the existing rule, make a change to it, maybe to include something, exclude something, and so on. The problem I have there is if the vendor then subsequently goes and updates that rule and gives better protection, or better detection, I should say, then I lose that benefit because I'm now running from a custom rule instead of the original out-of-the-box rule. Within our platform, I have the ability to do what we call rule tuning. So I can apply an extra filter on top of that rule. So now, for example, if I need to exclude a user from triggering a security alert, instead of going in and modifying that original rule, I can apply a filter that simply says, and user is not John Doe. So I'm still, going to benefit from that original rule, if that makes sense. I can also apply those tuning expressions to multiple rules as well. So if I want to exclude, again, I'm going to pick on a user. If I want to exclude a specific user from triggering any of my AWS rules, then I can apply that across all of them. I don't need to go and modify 20 different rules. Okay, one filter, multiple rules, job done, nice and easy. And thank you, Ava. I definitely need to have something with some honey in it. Thank you. And yeah, like I said, the main benefit there really is as part of this platform, because we're obviously a SaaS vendor. And I talked about this at the very beginning. So our solution is designed by SOC analysts for SOC analysts. And the guys that work in the background who curate all of our content for us, they are working on that day in, day out. And they release that content. We probably push content out maybe a couple of times a week, if not more. So whenever a new threat is detected, we normally have content created, tested, deployed within a day. And again, that's something that you guys don't need to worry about. We do it for you. We do all the testing. You don't have to do manual updates and that kind of thing. Okay. So to close off here, really on the Cloud SIEM Advanced, it is, again, it's hosted in AWS. It's designed for security operations teams. If you have a requirement to just log everything centrally, to have visualization, dashboarding capabilities, but you also want to leverage threat intelligence, then our Cloud SIEM might do that job for you. If you've got a dedicated SOC team and you need to have that workflow, or you're suffering from alert fatigue, then Cloud SIEM Advanced is where that comes into play for you. Okay. And that's probably pretty much it. I want to just touch across now actually to our education piece. I know we've got about 15 minutes left, so I promise not to take all of that time up for you. Let me come across to this platform. 2 seconds. Let me just change my screen share. Okay, here we go. So now coming back to the core platform. And again, I kind of mentioned this earlier on when I first started with Sumo. I found it really easy with the the documentation, the lessons, the certifications, really easy to get my head around the platform and learn it pretty quickly. So to access that from within our platform, from the home screen here, okay, you can see a couple of tabs here. One is Learn and one is Certification. So if I click on the Learn one, we have this whole heap of really good content. Everything from hands-on labs that you can access via the platform, all the way through to, you know, micro lessons that you can view on YouTube. We've got a dedicated YouTube channel for all of our content, and there's some really cool stuff in there that a lot of my colleagues go in and curate. You know, these little micro lessons on how do I do this, how do I do that. So that's really useful. We have really comprehensive documentation, really good community, you know, where you can go in and post general questions and so on. And then, you know, all the way through to certification itself. So if you want to become certified in any of our platforms, we do everything from, and I'm hoping this is going to pop up and show you, it should do. We do everything from kind of fundamental training right the way through to advanced. We do that for our continuous intelligence platform, whether that's from a security focus or not, okay? And then we also do it for Cloud SIEM Advanced. So it's like really comprehensive, and it is a super cool way to be able to go in and learn the platform as quickly as possible. And there's a lot of dedicated stuff in there around, you know, different vendor log sources that you want to bring in, AWS and everything else. So, you know, what you essentially do here is these are all of the courses. So if I come down to something like the security one, you know, here's cloud security monitoring and analytics. Just come back out again. And then everything else from, you know, from administration to search mastery, metrics, Kubernetes, whatever you want to do, it's there. And then finally, there's a get certified button, Danny, or a get certified area. What I would say is if you're currently running Sumo Logic in your environment, make sure you access these when you're logged in as yourself, okay? Don't do them logged in as one of our demo users. You would want to come in and do this logged in as yourself, because then you'll get the certification actually assigned direct to you, okay? And that kind of pretty much sums up the bit I wanted to cover around that kind of training, certification, where you find stuff and so on. We've got around about 10 minutes or so left for this session. I'm quite happy to open that up actually for any questions that you guys have for the last 10 minutes. If you don't have any questions, then I'm happy to give you some time back. You're probably tired of listening to me waffle on and choke on a dry throat, etc. So I'm happy either way. Yeah, we're here to answer any questions for the last 10 minutes. If you're done and dusted, then feel free, please, to drop off. I would just give you a quick reminder as well, if you could do that survey for us. Don't be too harsh on me. That would be really appreciated. It gives us a good understanding of the content we deliver, how useful you found it, anything, you know, suggestions, whatever else, really beneficial for us. So I'm going to leave it there. Like I said, any questions, feel free to pop those in. If you don't have anything and you want to drop off, then thank you very much for sitting and listening to us for the last few hours. It's been an absolute pleasure to come through and talk everything kind of AWS and Cloud SIEM to you guys. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great job, Stefan. Happy to answer any questions here regarding either the Cloud SIEM Advanced or Cloud SIEM or the core capabilities of Sumo. Welcome to reach out to us. You can find us on LinkedIn if you want to reach out there, if you don't have another way. I'm curious, how many people here are current Sumo users and have used the product before? Anyone maybe raise their hand or just give me a thumbs up or something in the chat. If you're not aware, we have a way of contacting us as well. Oh, cool. Right. Nice. We have at least one user here. We got a couple. Okay. I've got a link. I'll pop this link in here real quick. Maybe maybe you don't have it already, but this is our Slack workspace where I'm out there, Stefan's out there, our peers are out there, other consultants, partners, other customers, they're all out there. So you're welcome to reach out to us, and you might need to mention me if you're not talking to me directly. So that would be cool. Oh, we got a few people who are certified as well. Fantastic. Well done. Yeah, if there's anything you need help with on from a Sumo perspective, and you don't know who to go to, that's a fantastic place, the slack.sumologic.com area. We run those training sessions that were just mentioned on a few different bases with different timings. Some of them are self-service, so you can go self-paced through the courses. They're recorded. Some of them we offer on a quarterly basis as a virtual class. So we do it a lot like we're doing today, with one of us leading the course and another person on the Q&A and the chat trying to answer things. And then in the past, before COVID, we did in-person trainings. So we would do a couple of days in Melbourne or a couple of days in Sydney or Brisbane, or a few different locations. We do a couple places in New Zealand as well. So keep a lookout for those, and always happy to engage with you guys and help you on your journey here. So even if it's something like writing a regex, although I'm not the guy you want to write your regex for you, we do have some guys who are experts in that. So some people around the globe.
James, we've got a question with regards to the security overview for AWS dashboard. Do you know which application that's in, or is that one that we probably have put together in our environment as a kind of a snapshot of what you can get in different apps?
I didn't see that question come up. The overview that's in the demo and put together there, well, I guess it's in the lab environment, but that was originally created to perform a demo, and it just kind of worked. It's been pulled from multiple different sources. So each of those panels comes from a different originating source and put together in a new dashboard to kind of highlight that you can do that kind of thing. You can click on the query behind the dashboard panel, then you can apply that to a whole new dashboard. So you can make your own tailored dashboard that you want to see, because it makes sense to be able to do that type of thing depending on the technology stacks that you have in your organization. So yeah, cool. Yeah, the security overview. Yeah, I think that's the actual one that's in that demo environment. If you're in there, one of the things you can do is are you still in that demo environment, Stefan?
The one where we did the overview dashboard.
Yeah, if not, I can probably jump in quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, if you don't mind sharing that, I'll guide you through a couple of things to show Mohammed what he can do there, even in the training environment. And any of you can do this as well. Yeah, okay, there we go. Yeah, so I'm guessing that's what you want to see, Mohammed, is that guy. If you find that, excuse me, if you do a search for that in the upper left-hand corner there, Stefan. Yeah, just right there, just type in security overview. Right. Yeah, cool. And then you'll see it about midway down. Yeah. Now the three vertical dots, the vertical ellipsis, you can click Save As, Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, cancel that. I meant export because you still have to save it. But yeah, if you export, you can download or copy that exported JSON. And now you can take that, Mohammed, and go import that into your own environment. What you'll need to do, though, is potentially update the source category or the search criteria for where it's referencing the data. But that gives you a basis to start with. So you may not have that in your production environment.
It could be as well, James, that it's not in the environment that we have. So what I can do is, I don't think I can paste this into the chat window because it'll be downloaded as a JSON format. I'm more than happy. Let me just paste my email address in the chat window. If anybody wants this, then
that's exactly what I was doing.
Then send me an email, yeah, and we can I can export it out.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, and like James said, so just to highlight here, you can actually see, a reference here, source category equals, and obviously for us it's using lab sec demo octa or XYZ. So, if you get, and this happens as well. So sometimes if you get a dashboard or a pack or something that you've had shared with you through our community, okay, then normally I would just open this up in a Word editor, Sublime or whatever, and then just come in, find the source category, and then replace it with whatever's relevant for my environment. Okay. So I'm more than happy to, let me just download this locally and I'll have it ready. And then anybody that wants this particular one, if you, drop me an email, okay, I'll share it with you, and then you'll need to just go in and change those source categories, etc.
The other thing that happens when you import these in is, and you apply it toward a different data set, is the parsing for different data sets could be different because the logs coming in from one source might be JSON, and the other log ingest may not be JSON. It may be something completely different. So you have to kind of watch that. If you need help with that, ping us on the Slack channel or email, and happy to help you with that.
Yeah.
So that's
cool.
Yeah, any other questions? So we're right at 12:58 now, so we're pretty much on time.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Cool. Okay. Well, once again, thank you everybody for joining the session. I appreciate it. Sometimes it's hard to take 3 hours out of your day and jump onto a session with a couple of vendors. So we really do appreciate your time. Hopefully you've learned something today, not just around, what Sumo Logic can do for you from that visibility capability, but also some information around AWS, some of those best practices, the way AWS log things, and that kind of thing. We're really happy to share that information with you. So once again, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to catching up with you again in the future. All right, thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to close down the session. Thank you. Talk to you all again soon.